While the merciless north wind blew, the boy managed to hide in a cave, which was difficult to see to the human eye due to the snow. But he was deeply mistaken in thinking that he would remain unnoticed, because he was soon found and forced to leave his shelter. The strangers were interested in only one question: where the relic was. Zeke Draker simply laughed in the faces of these fools and simply asked if they would tell anyone if they knew where this treasure was. This answer seemed to anger the strangers even more, because the terrible curses they called the guy simply did not stop. They threatened to take his life. One of the trackers calmed down a bit and said that they needed to contact the main squad and report their coordinates, as well as that the Northern Phantom was already in their hands. They looked at Zeke with hatred and did not understand how the guy was still conscious and even able to stand on his feet, since both of his arms were missing. The guy himself was simply seething with anger inside, because these two stupid creatures didn't even imagine who they were dealing with, and it would be better for them to just leave him alone now. Two strangers couldn't calm down and decided to have a good time making fun of the poor guy until the main squad arrived. They, due to their feeble minds, were already coming up with tortures for the guy on the fly, and chuckled maliciously, looking in his direction, unaware of the approaching danger. But a minute later, something happened that the would-be warriors had not expected at all. The Northern Phantom raised his hands from the ground, and they somehow magically grew back onto his shoulders. Zeke had no intention of sitting still and calmly listening to the insults these two were throwing at him. He hadn't come this far for that. He was the first unsuccessful, unawakened member of the renowned Draker family, Dragon Slayers, and due to his body being unable to use aura, he failed to awaken. This was the main reason why his family simply threw the guy out of his parents' house, and then he tried to survive alone and tried his best to become stronger. But it was not for nothing that Zeke remembered one old proverb, which said that if all a person strives for is simply strength, then soon he will be left with nothing. While he was pondering this, two strangers tossed a coin to settle their bet on who would be the first to mock the Northern Phantom, while he was so vulnerable. The coin glittered in the air and silently landed on the back of one of the men's hands. Finally, their dispute would be resolved. The coin landed heads up, and one of the strangers smiled slyly, because he was finally lucky, and he would be the first. Now the Phantom would beg for mercy. They were already prepared to give the guy a good beating, taking advantage of his condition, but they had to hurry, because the main squad would soon join them. But these two did not take into account the main thing. The Phantom's hands were already in place. He looked at them with eyes full of contempt, and in those eyes there was not a drop of fear. One of the strangers was simply stunned with horror, because the Phantom began to advance, preparing for battle, and it looked quite scary. The strong will crush and take away everything they can. That was the most honest truth of this world. But these two did not take into account the main thing. The Phantom's hands were already in place. He looked at them with eyes full of contempt, and in those eyes there was not a drop of fear. They thought it would be cool to get beat up by a guy, but everything turned out to be quite the opposite, because it was the smug strangers who ended up getting beaten up. It seemed that Zeke had simply gone crazy. He was no longer afraid of anything, and his eyes simply filled with hatred for these two people. The strangers finally realized that there was no way to escape. All that was left was to hope that they would survive. By this time, the rest of the group had arrived at the cave, and those who arrived were also completely shocked by what they saw. It finally became clear to everyone that they were not dealing with an ordinary person, because he could regenerate his body after terrible injuries. One of those present wondered out loud whether this strange guy would be able to put his head back in place if it was cut off. The rest of the team rushed into battle with the Northern Phantom with renewed vigor, hoping that in a few minutes it would be defeated. But how wrong they all were. The guy turned out to be not one to be timid, and did not lose his confidence even for a second. No matter how hard he tried, the forces were still unequal. So after half an hour, Zeke received multiple wounds and could not get up from his knees. After a few minutes and gathering all his strength, the guy stood up and looked around. The strangers were already gone without a trace, but he had beaten them up good and proper too. He looked at his hands in horror. His fingers were barely unclenched, but Zeke could still move them, and that meant a lot. Even though he hadn't been able to take proper revenge, a faint smile appeared on his face, and only he knew the real reason for it. Zeke opened his hand and realized that he had managed to steal the relic that the Emperor had been hunting for, so his death would not be entirely in vain. The boy closed his eyes again, his head spinning from the multiple wounds, and it felt like he was giving up on life. Clutching the relic even tighter, he mentally apologized to his Alicia for the 1000th time. But then something strange happened. The figurine in his palm began to glow with a strange bright light. Real magic was happening. It seemed as if some strange magical power was coming out of the fiery relic, and this spirit looked little like a kind wizard. Rather, it was a real monster. Out of nowhere, the boy heard the words that the soul of an ancient dragon is imprinted in the will of someone who constantly perseveres and goes towards their goal. The voice said that the higher powers had taken an urgent measure, but now the only thing needed was the consent of Zeke Draker himself. The guy himself felt like he was gradually going crazy, hearing different voices urging him to make a decision. He didn't care anymore. Let them do whatever they wanted. The countdown began, and within seconds the power that Zeke had unconsciously consented to was activated, and now he looked exactly like this. The guy had a hard time understanding what was happening to him, why he looked like a teenager, and his real image was gradually dissolving into thin air. A couple of minutes later, he teleported and found himself on a bed in a large room, and for some reason it seemed painfully familiar to him. The place Zeke ended up in turned out to be the Draker family's training center called the Cradle, which is why it was familiar to him. It was his birth family's property. The Draker family was very famous in these parts, as its members were dragon slayers and were considered one of the 3 great transcendent families on the continent. Tarakan Draker, Zeke's ancestor, is an ancient hero who saved the continent by slaying the treacherous dragon Bahamut during a war 1,000 years ago. After Cockroach's death, his clan united to continue fighting dragons, and soon the elders decided to found the Draker family. Absolutely all members of the Draker family had a common ability. They possessed the blessing of the aura. Perhaps this happened because they were the descendants of the hero. This gave the members of the clan a unique ability. They have the ability to awaken their high-level aura and become valiant knights. But, as it turned out later, everyone in the family had this ability, except for one member, and it turned out to be Zeke Draker, who was just an ordinary person. He heard the strange voice again, which said that the system was rebooting, and a few minutes later said that the soul of the awakened one was confirmed and configured at 100%. Zeke found himself chosen, without realizing it. The soul of the chosen awakened one received the will of the ancient dragon and completely merged with it into a single system. On the virtual screen, he saw all the information and finally understood what had happened. It turned out that he had activated the relic that he had saved with such difficulty in the recent battle. Then the guy got acquainted with the system and read detailed information about his skills. Now he had received the dragon's blessing and was in the rank of healer. It turned out that he now possesses strange abilities. For example, his hand can pass through matter, and Zeke can also move around the virtual world. Then the boy realized that, in addition to everything else, he also knew the language of dragons. But he didn't yet quite understand why he needed such a skill, since such a language was not currently used in his world. He remembered that his teacher had told him about this, that in ancient times people divided themselves into classes depending on what they were especially good at. Each class trains in a special technique known as a skill, and since their class is a healer, they can use the gift of healing. If what he sees on the monitor of this strange tablet is to be believed, he is already a healer and can use this ability at any time. Zeke decided it would be a good idea to test this option to make sure that what was written in the status bar accurately corresponded to reality. In his past life, he became a healer when he was 20 years old, immediately after the etheric hall was opened. Vivid images from his past life began to surface in his memory again, and the boy realized that it was necessary to draw some parallels so that the puzzle would fit together correctly. He was always distinguished by a sharp mind, so it was not difficult, having put all the facts together, to understand that at this moment his air hall was already open. If everything is going the way he thinks it is, it means that many opportunities are opening up before him to put everything in its place. Even though his trained body was no longer there, he returned to his past with his skills and strange memories. Compared to who he was in his regression, the guy was now in a more advantageous position, and this made him extremely happy. But there was another problem, because in order to find out what he was capable of in this position, it was necessary to find out what was at his disposal. So far, the guy had absolutely no idea how to do this or where to start, so he spent most of his time sitting in his room and thinking a lot. There was a knock on the door, and Zeke tried to hide his virtual tablet somewhere so that no one could see that he had strange abilities. Without waiting for permission to enter, Zeke's only servant, an elderly but very stylish man named Decker, entered the room. The man began to scold the guy for not getting ready yet, and Zeke, in turn, was glad that Decker did not see the virtual tablets. He asked the man again why he was so angry, and the man in turn did not understand why the boy was not in a hurry. It was very irresponsible. Zeke thought for a moment that, when he was little, he really was afraid of this gloomy and eternally dissatisfied man. And even though he is no longer 5 years old, the feeling of fear still did not leave him for a very long time. And now he has a skill that requires a calm and cool mind. The servant, whom Zeke now considered his assistant, could not understand why the young master had forgotten about such an important event. The man sometimes felt like this boy never listened to him at all, and that he needed to repeat everything twice, or even more. But Zeke was deep in thought at this time. Decker must have been referring to the evolutionary test pancration, otherwise why the rush. All Drakers are trained at the Cradle Training Center starting at age 7 and undergo rigorous basic training for 5 years. Opponents are assigned by the instructor, but there are cases when students themselves choose who to fight, provided that both duelists agree. But since it is at this competition that the class in which the Academy students will be enrolled is determined, the children have no other choice but to fight with all their might. As everyone knew, the main pancration competitions were scheduled for this day, and the stadium was already prepared for spectators and competitors. The judge stated that he believed that all participants in the competition were aware that the final component of the assessment would now be calculated. All the participants stood at attention and listened attentively to the judge. Each of them was scared, but at the same time, each wanted to win. The judge decided to cheer up the young people a little and wished each of them good luck, not forgetting to remind them that under no circumstances should they lose heart or be afraid. After the senior instructor Panmark gave all the valuable instructions, the group of young people answered in chorus that they understood everything and were ready for any challenges. But suddenly, whispers began to form in the crowd, because someone present saw Zeke Draker among the contestants. He appeared here again after last year's humiliation. The first competition began, and the judge called 2 participants, Aaron and Gotha, into the arena, who immediately descended onto the field. After the whistle, which signaled the start of the fight, the 2 young men attacked each other, competing without weapons, with their fists. Each of these 2 participants sincerely believed that they could easily defeat their opponent, because so much effort and patience had been invested in training. The stands watched the proceedings attentively, and some of the participants concluded that the outcome of the fight had long been clear, since one of the players had taken a poor defensive position. Gotha can no longer fight. As a result, Aaron defeated the enemy, and Zeke had foreseen this long ago, but, in his opinion, both guys were well prepared enough. At some point, the young man even became a little bored watching everything that was happening. He even began to yawn, which greatly infuriated one of the participants, who was sitting and doing nothing but watching Zeke. His name was Leon, and it was already clear from the face of this participant that he was a fairly aggressive player. All he needed was to splash out his negativity and beat one of the participants with it. The referee called Zeke and Leon onto the field, the latter already itching to punch someone in the face and ultimately win the duel. Zeke had already resigned himself to his fate. He guessed that Fortuna would give him an unpleasant surprise in the form of this crazy Leon. But there was nothing left to do but stand firm in the fight. The guy didn't care whether he was doing better or worse in battle, because Zeke had clearly decided that today he would not repeat last year's mistakes and would definitely win. But for some reason, last year's fight came to mind. And ironically, the last time he fought, it was Leon, and then ultimately lost shamefully. Today, Zeke was absolutely sure that Leon had set everything up somehow so that Draker would end up as his opponent again. His family believed that their son should be able to perform dirty tricks in order to become a true dragon slayer. In his past life, the 4 siblings in his direct lineage never had the slightest chance to meet. But the strange thing was that, in addition to the siblings, there were more than a dozen cousins in the family, and they were quite aggressive. Each of these relatives only dreamed of beating up the direct heirs of the family, or doing some other dirty trick. And Zeke was not only no exception, on the contrary, he was beaten more than anyone else and terribly bullied at every opportunity. And now Leon was reminding the boy how he had disgraced himself last year, suffering a crushing failure because he was considered inferior. The guy tried to calm down and remembered that he now had cool abilities, such as a calm mind, so he remained cool. He simply warned his upstart opponent that if he didn't stop acting like an idiot, he wouldn't stand on ceremony with him. Leon didn't expect such a reaction from last year's rundown guy, so he started acting even more aggressively and got violent. When Zeke heard another insult directed at him, he decided to immediately activate the critical strike skill. And Leon did not expect this powerful blow at all, because he was sure that in front of him stood a helpless boy, whom he would beat up again. Zeke, in turn, looked at the hand and was simply stunned, because it was glowing with some strange light and there was a lot of unbridled power in it. The skill manifested itself as soon as the guy took a swing at Leon, and within seconds, the referee ran up to them and shouted that he hadn't yet announced the start of the fight. But Zeke protested, because on the battlefield, no one says, "Ready, set, go." The advantage always goes to the one who hits the enemy first. The judge also didn't expect the boy to start to get indignant. He remembered Zeke from last year and didn't think he could change so much and succeed in a fight. Leon struggled to get up from the ground, his frightened eyes expressing complete bewilderment at how this boy could fight so well and take a hit. The man cautiously asked Leon if he could continue competing, to which he replied that he was perfectly fine. But there was no sign of order there because the enemy had difficulty staying on his feet after the blows he had received, and blood was dripping from his broken nose. A terrible anger gradually appeared in Leon's eyes, and finally, gathering his strength, he shouted that he was going to kill this impudent Draker. The enemy's words seemed funny to Zeke. He thought that he had taught this impudent fellow an insufficiently clear lesson, and perhaps it should be repeated. The stands began to buzz as they watched the action, as no one could believe that Zeke Draker had improved his skill level so much in just 1 year. The guys in the arena continued to fight, and it cannot be said that Leon was completely bad in the fight. He also delivered accurate and crushing blows. But the thing is that Zeke Draker didn't feel them at all. His system activated more and more new abilities, and the guy didn't feel any pain. Zeke concluded that if he was constantly on guard, the enemy would cease to pose any threat to him at all. Leon wasn't going to give up either, as he had a good command of hand-to-hand combat techniques, and he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of his friends. So at one point he made a successful grab and tried to knock Zeke to the ground, taking advantage of the fact that he looked back. A terrible fight broke out again. Even the referee could not understand whose side was winning and who would win. While striking Zeke, Leon did not forget to insult him and call him an inferior warrior. But the guy was little offended by this. As Leon was about to strike again, Zeke's combat ability activated again and he struck his opponent first, sending him flying back. Zeke smiled. Finally, he would be taken seriously, and he would be able to prove that he was still capable of much. Let them be afraid. The referee intervened here. Even he didn't expect the boy to deliver such precise and hard blows. A 12-year-old boy shouldn't be able to fight like that. But there was a moment when Leon began to actively attack, and for a few minutes the man thought that Zeke would lose, just like last time. However, this did not happen, because at an opportune moment, Draker dodged and punched Leon in the chin, thereby freeing himself from his grip. No one believed their eyes. Everyone in the stands doubted whether this was the Zeke Draker they knew before. Leon was just furious. And the most interesting thing was that he couldn't do anything. No matter how hard he tried, Zeke was always better. And Draker, in turn, understood that it was necessary to create a distance between them. Then, the situation would work out in the best possible way for him. Leon was already quite exhausted, but he didn't want to show it. He couldn't lose to this coward in front of everyone. He attacked every time, and with each new time his powers were less and less, and Zeke meanwhile learned to control his abilities. And the guy remained cheerful and confident. As it turned out, controlling his abilities wasn't that difficult. Rather, it was even pleasant. Now that he is in complete control of himself, his feelings and actions, we can teach this impudent fellow the following lesson. This couldn't go on any longer, so Zeke decided that there was no point in torturing Leon himself, as well as all the spectators in the stands, any further. All of Leon's friends, as well as those who came to see the relative of the Draker family, had long since realized that he would not win today. Zeke, at first unexpectedly, this time turned out to be much stronger and more agile than his opponent, and was right now delivering the finishing blow. The precision strike skill the boy now possessed was aimed at the enemy's weakest points to inflict critical damage. The spectators, in amazement, even stood up in the stands to get a better look at what was happening in the arena. For some reason, Zeke didn't feel sorry for his opponent at that moment. Let the arrogant Leon remember this day for the rest of his life. Then the guy turned to the spectators who were still standing there in a daze and asked them not to stare, but to come down and, if they wanted, say everything to his face. He is no longer that weak and insecure boy that they all love to bully. Into place in Zeke's head, and the situation became a little clearer. Everyone continued to stare at the battered Leon. He, in turn, looked at the crowd and shouted angrily for everyone to stop staring and go home. Zeke Draker also looked around at those present and shouted to the crowd that if anyone wanted to tell him anything, they should come down and do it looking him in the eye and stop talking about him behind his back. Another guy came out of the crowd. His look was very bold and straightforward for now. He came closer to the arena and looked the winner over from head to toe. It was another of Draker's cousins, a guy named Jacob Wardeck, and he also decided to challenge the guy to a duel. This impudent upstart decided that since Leon had failed to win, he would do it and would definitely avenge his relative. Zeke reacted calmly to this situation and asked Jacob to come down from the stands and take another fighter with him. Fighting Jacob alone would be very boring, so let the guy take his servant Liam Stone. Zeke shouted to his new opponent that now he would have at least some chance of victory, but this, of course, is not a fact. Jacob's eyes flashed with real rage because his cousin had just humiliated him in front of everyone. Now he would have to solve the problem on the battlefield. It seemed that the guy was simply seething with hatred for Draker, and he wanted to quickly smear this upstart on the ground, which is what he planned to do in the very next minutes. When the two guys entered the arena, the referee immediately warned that the fight could not begin without his permission. A man will definitely give a sign when he considers it necessary, and when he is sure that the opponents are ready for a real fight. In his past life, Liam Stone was Jacob's servant and studied at the cradle of the academy. The guy remembered him well, but since he was a distant relative, the older relatives decided to leave the boy without an education, and he begged to be admitted to a higher educational academy. But in the end, Liam joined the knightly order of a small state called Baronin and received good training there. Once Baronin fell, the guy became a mercenary. Well, in troubled times, people are drawn to the strong, so after a long time as a mercenary, he became a Red Knight and founded his own guild called the Stone Mercenaries. Under his command, he united the largest groups of mercenaries, which is why he was nicknamed the King of Mercenaries. Then, when the Empire hired Stone's mercenaries, Liam entered the Continental Wars, and Zeke, along with the Northerners, faced him on the battlefield. But now everything could have turned out differently, because this is not a war, not a battlefield, but an ordinary competition for first place. Zeke looked carefully at his opponents and reminded them once again that, according to the terms of this round, the guys had to attack him together. The guy was so confident in himself that he clearly understood on whose side victory would be, and now absolutely nothing scared him. Jacob just snorted, then laughed, saying he wasn't going to play along with Zeke's cheap trick. After the referee's signal, the guy was the first to run up to Draker and decided to kick him in the torso. The attacker was sure that Zeke would immediately fall to the ground from such a blow, but something went wrong, because Draker remained invulnerable. He looked mockingly at his opponent and joked that he should have looked around carefully before striking. These words completely threw the enemy off balance. Jacob Wardeck became increasingly angry and lost his temper. This circus had to be put to an end. Well, the guy couldn't do anything. Zeke Draker continued to stay on his feet and deftly dodged the blows that rained down on him from all sides. Then the guy decided to activate his superpower and show these two impudent guys what a real duel is. And in the eyes of his opponent, Zeke finally saw flashes of fear. Jacob was no longer so confident in his victory. He reminded the enemy that he had warned them that they needed to attack him together. Maybe then there would have been at least some result. So let him expect no mercy, because today, Zeke Draker wants to show everyone present what he is capable of. To avoid further embarrassment, Jacob Wardeck shouted to his servant Liam to join the fight. He screamed for Liam to come down to the ring and help him finish off this cocky jerk. Liam Stone was the same age as the others, but the thing was that his arm span was longer than the others, and that was a little alarming. Zeke Draker was prepared for this opponent to be more serious, and he wouldn't be able to do anything if Liam Stone attacked first. Therefore, the guy decided to immediately take the initiative into his own hands and, in complete desperation, rushed into a battle from which he was supposed to emerge victorious. A whole flurry of blows rained down on the enemy, as Zeke decided to use several of his superpowers and demonstrate them on the enemy. He decided to use the Northern Fist fighting technique that was used in the Middle Lands, and the tactic worked 100%. Even though Zeke had learned to control his abilities, fighting Liam Stone was difficult. Before he had even done anything, he was already starting to choke. But the reason was not only Zeke, but also the monstrous physical preparation of Liam himself, who did not launch counterattacks, but simply endured and did not lose his vigilance. Now Zeke understood how strong the enemy's body was. His task was to get Liam out of control. It was necessary to use more and more superpowers. Otherwise, the fight could have ended in just a few minutes. And of course, Zeke would have lost. The next blow should have been precise and crushing. But Stone deftly dodged once again, and the guy's hand simply slid down his shoulder. The situation began to irritate the guy, and it was time to bring the matter to an end. But the stubborn Liam Stone did not give up. The fight only intensified, and the spectators were even afraid to take a breath, so as not to be distracted from the arena where everything was happening. It was difficult to see who had injured whom, but it was already clear that someone had a broken nose or jaw, and there were splashes of blood everywhere. Realizing things were bad, Zeke decided to bring out the big guns and activated his class skill, which caused heightened senses. He deftly grabbed Leon Stone's neck with his legs. No matter how strong his body was, no one could survive for long without oxygen. About half a minute passed, and Zeke began to realize that his opponent's body was weakening significantly. He was clearly not getting enough oxygen and was breathing heavily. The enemy's face began to resemble some kind of mythical demon. His eyes blazed with real fire and seemed like they could burn everything in their path. The spectators had already left their stands and were beginning to approach the arena to get a better look at how this terrible duel would end. But then, at one point, Liam Stone took the initiative and, without even expecting it from himself, knocked Zeke to the ground. He smiled crookedly and said with the confidence of a winner that the time had finally come to destroy Zeke Draker once and for all. Decker knocked carefully on the door and, without waiting for an answer, entered the room. He asked Zeke to allow him to take his pulse. The guy didn't look at his butler, but he understood perfectly well that he wanted to know if Zeke had awakened his aura. Within seconds, Zeke rolled up the sleeve of his shirt and extended his hand, which was glowing a pale blue, to the servant. When checking whether someone's superpowers have awakened, they usually just look at the wrist, but Decker took a more thorough approach. The butler understood perfectly well that not all knights were the same. They were divided according to their combat skills and ability to control aura. White swordsman meant the level of a beginner. Most children before the blessing ceremony are white swordsmen. At the level of yellow swordsmen are those who have managed to awaken their aura and discover their superpowers, such as all the students of the cradle. Once they gained the ability to freely control the aura, they could easily obtain the title of knight. At the purple knight level, they had the opportunity to enhance their sword with aura and gain additional abilities. Then began the kingdom of those who reached the very top, which is what the mercenary king Liam was like, as well as Zeke, before he regressed. It was precisely those who reached the very top who were popularly nicknamed the Red Knights. Such people enjoyed all the benefits and honor of society. But how did it happen that such an experienced person like Decker became Zeke Draker's personal nanny? The guy hoped that the man was not able to notice his broadcast. After all, only 2 people in the whole world can use this ether, and Zeke knew this very well. The butler looked the boy in the eyes again and asked if it was possible that the young gentleman was hiding something from him. But the guy also asked the man in response if he was hiding important information. But then he stopped himself and said that he was just joking. The butler should have asked the question differently. He should have asked why Zeke had changed only now after so much time. Now everything will change and fall into its rightful place, and all Decker has to do is just follow Zeke and help him. In turn, Decker said that he had prepared a training room for the guy, which he had long requested, and now the guy can work out. Walking down the deserted corridor, Zeke wondered who exactly had ordered Decker to keep a constant eye on him. It couldn't be someone on his mother's side. Returning to his room, the guy decided to rest a little and at the same time check the system. Perhaps there were some important updates. It turned out that there were some after all. During the battle, several more useful skills were activated, and the guy realized that his abilities grew depending on the frequency of their use. The conclusion suggested itself. It turns out that he had all this before, and if he learned something new, then a new skill is added accordingly. But Zeke Draker couldn't understand one thing. What was the difference between a skill and a class skill because they were activated in the same way? There were also dragon skills, but it was not possible to display them because you had to score 10 points to unlock them. Something told Zeke that this skill and class told him that it must be connected to the ancient relic he had taken from the cave. But he had little information. He needed to get into the dungeon, but only purple knights were allowed there. Okay, the only way out is to pick up a sword and train until the guy's body becomes stronger. He is a descendant of an ancient, powerful family, and he will find out why he regressed into the past and what kind of system this is that he managed to get into. There are only 2 known powers in the world, the knight's aura and the mage's mana. Knights strengthen their aura in dungeons. Mages control their mana with the help of circles. These 2 forces are at opposite ends of the spectrum, so if one is awakened, the other will remain dormant. However, Zeke failed to awaken either force. His family expelled him, and during his wanderings he managed to meet a master who gave the guy a lot of different knowledge about healing and the etheric hall. Thanks to the etheric hall, which the master developed, one can control the energy of nature, that is, the ether. As it turned out later, Zeke Draker became one of the few in this world who could use the ether so skillfully. He had only been training for 2 hours, but the guy felt like he was about to faint from exhaustion and loss of strength. He needed to activate the healing. This super skill was very rare, and the guy at first did not even suspect its existence until he met a master on his way. If he used it in front of people, the guy would be treated like a lunatic, which is why Zeke couldn't use it during the fight with Liam. He had to hurry to recover as soon as he returned to his room. He had to fully recover his strength and pretend that everything was fine. Now that his strength had been restored and the guy felt much better, he could easily continue his training. Draker's tongue understood perfectly well that superpowers are very good. But one should not ignore one's own body and its physical condition. Therefore, the guy decided that for now he would simply observe the situation, and especially the behavior of his butler. He needed more information. A few days later, rumors about Zeke began to spread around the Cradle cafeteria, saying that the boy had become a completely different person. Some continued to call him a loser. Others began to fear him and hoped that he would subdue the stronger guys. Reina Turin was one of the strongest in the academy, and all the recruits were afraid of him because the guy looked truly terrifying. Owen Simmons sat at the head of the table and supervised the dinner process. He warned the boy that even if he had no appetite, it would still be better to eat before the fight. He said this in an absolutely calm voice, melancholically chewing the meat and looking around with a sharp gaze at everyone present. Turin did not take the elder's words seriously and simply thought that he was again starting to nag and pretend to be the great chief. But when Simmons started talking about Turin having a pronounced inferiority complex, the guy jumped up from the table, throwing the knife on the floor with force. The rest just watched the situation, having no idea how this scandal would end at dinner. Everything had gone too far. One of those present asked Tarun what he was going to do. She wasn't going to challenge Zeke Draker himself to a fight. He smiled and replied sarcastically that although Zeke turned out to be a hero, when it came to swords, it would be a pitiful sight because the guy couldn't really hold one in his hands. Everyone supported this idea. Draker is so weak that he had to buy a special sword because the usual one turned out to be too heavy for him. Leon reminded that there was nothing wrong with him losing to Zeke. He was just lucky enough to beat him in pancration. Zeke stood behind the wall and heard this conversation perfectly well. The guy decided not to remain silent and asked Leon to repeat it in his presence. If they truly think so, then none of them have the right to be a knight of House Draker. The boy picked up the sword he had been training with for the past few days and slowly headed towards the exit of the dining hall. In sword dueling, unlike pancration, real iron swords are used, and this is the cause of most of the incidents in the cradle. Moreover, it is here that the difference in the student's skills is most clearly manifested. It is here that the ritual begins, during which, finally, it all began. The referee asked Zeke Draker to come into the arena. The competition was about to begin. The guy walked confidently and freely to the center, holding a huge steel sword in his hands, which attracted the attention of absolutely everyone present. Reina Turin also confidently walked towards the center of the arena, and from her gaze it was clear that the girl was very serious. When both opponents came to the center of the arena, the referee announced that the competition would begin in a few minutes and that its outcome would determine the future winner. Reina looked straight into Zeke's eyes and said that today she chose him as her opponent. She was confident of her victory. But this didn't frighten the guy at all. He just smiled and replied that he would consider it an honor to duel with the Reina Turin herself. The girl noticed how easily he held the heavy steel sword in his hands. Before, he wouldn't have even been able to lift it. She thought that the Draker in front of her was not the same one she had laughed at and mocked last year. His aura was completely different. But after a minute, she tried to push these thoughts away. Reina wouldn't let the guy confuse her before the fight even started. Zeke Draker kept his cool, calm, and knew he could handle it. But fighting the Lightning Knight was a pretty intense event. Reina Turin is known as the Lightning Knight. She was one of the knights who made a name for herself during the Continental Wars, and she was also one of the greatest Drakers of the next generation. His rival was really good at her job. She awakened her aura even before she underwent the blessing ceremony. And this happened several years ago. And now the guy needs to try really hard to show Reina Turin that he is no longer the little boy who always lost in battle. He has changed a lot. The referee announced the start of the fight, and the competition began. Both opponents began to move towards each other, holding heavy swords in their hands. He held himself very well and deftly repelled all of his opponent's attacks. He didn't even feel the weight of the sword and was completely focused on the fight. He admitted to himself that Reina Turin was better and more experienced than he thought, so he must not let his guard down for a second. Reina was also focused, and all the spectators were supporting her, shouting various curses and insults at Zeke Draker. Defeated and humiliated, Leon shouted at the girl to not stand on ceremony with Zeke and finish him off quickly. Other spectators also watched the fight with great interest, but unlike Leon, they noted Zeke Draker's good preparation. Everyone understood that Reina Turin was not playing with her opponent at all right now. It was really very difficult for her, because Zeke turned out to be well prepared, despite the fact that the guy held up very well. The girl clearly felt the gaps in his aura, and this gave her more strength and self-confidence. Well, no matter how quickly she tried to take advantage of the moment, Zeke's sword blocked her attacks, as if it anticipated the player's actions. And then another thing was revealed. It looked like a training fight designed to train Zeke Draker. For a few seconds, the guy was even confused and almost lost his balance. But he quickly gathered his will into a fist and continued the fight. Quite a lot of time had already passed, but none of the opponents even thought about giving up. This no longer felt like a game, but a fight for survival. Rayona Turin had lost a lot of strength, but she had no intention of giving up her position. She still hoped to defeat Zeke Draker. The guy looked at her and understood how actively she studied when she was in the cradle. She fights honestly and values her reputation. But it was precisely her principles and impeccable honor that held the girl back in battle. She stuck to the tactics she had always used, without breaking tradition. And Zeke Draker thought, why not help this girl come out of her shell and show her true nature now? The guy started acting completely differently, and this was driving Reina crazy. She was getting furious and losing her guard. This could not be allowed to happen. Zeke decided to close the gap in just one move. The girl understood this, but he should not underestimate her speed. During the battle, Reina Turin learned all the habits of her opponent well. She fully recognized the fact that Zeke was a good warrior. Never before had she encountered such an experienced opponent. She valued and respected this in knights. Zeke turned out to be worthy. But no matter how you look at it, this fight had to be won by one person. And the winner would also be the same, so she wasn't going to give in to the guy. It was time to end this performance, so the girl gathered all her strength into a fist, attacked, and knocked Zeke's sword out of his hands. As expected of Reina Turin, she didn't use her aura as usual, but the cadets probably didn't notice. But when Zeke's attack was rapidly approaching her, she still resorted to using her superpowers, but they were barely noticeable. Reina used to always promise that she would never use her aura during battle until she ended up at the Knight Academy. It was here that the girl was forced to compromise her principles and do what the fighting technique requires of a warrior. But here, everything didn't go as Reina had imagined before the fight. Because for some reason, the general principles didn't work, and she had to act according to the situation. At one point, Zeke Draker delivered a very sharp punch to Reina Turin's neck, and the girl barely stayed on her feet. After the second such blow, Reina realized that this was the end. She could not resist and sank to one knee, blood flowing from her sponge opal. Spectators started shouting from the stands. They were indignant, because it was a sword fight. So why was Zeke using his fists? Zeke knew everyone was outraged to the limit, but he didn't care. In the end, he won this fight. He even had the desire to help the girl get up from her knees. But having driven this thought away, he asked Regina if she wanted to continue the fight. But when she got to her feet, the girl realized that further fighting was simply pointless. She had lost a lot of strength, and she had to admit that it was Zeke who had won this competition. Everyone in the stands simply howled with indignation, because Regina Turin was the best of the best. So why was she giving in to this small upstart? Just a few weeks ago, Draker was considered the scum of society, but now he has defeated one of the most talented students of the famous families. He has become a true warrior. It seemed as if the entire castle was simply ablaze, and soon the fire would consume the entire structure and only ashes would remain. There were many wounded soldiers lying around on the rocks. Some of them had already said goodbye to life and were simply being cleared away. Those who died were simply covered with sheets, then carried to the gorge and simply thrown from a great height into the abyss. Meanwhile, in the castle, the young man simply did not understand Abel, who in this situation simply sat and calmly drank tea. Rumors from the Knight Academy had already reached the castle. A letter said that Zeke Draker had defeated the best knight, Reina Turin. But the young man didn't react to this in any way and continued to enjoy the delicious drink. This guy is so nervous and gets on her nerves. Finally, Abel got up from the table. It was necessary to somehow solve this problem named Zeke Draker. There was still a little time left before the blessing ceremony. There are things to arrange before the next full moon, and now seems like a good time to visit your family. Adele smiled mysteriously, wondering what kind of awakening his younger brother Zeke Draker would have to go through. Zeke's victory at the competition left everyone in shock, as the young man had simply returned to the training center and resumed his training. And Zeke himself really didn't understand how he managed to become a Red Knight so easily with such a body from his past life. He periodically logged into the system and checked his status bar, which showed that he had received the blessing of the ancient dragon and had a number of skills. He managed to increase the level of some skills, and this was all thanks to the duel, and this could not but please the guy. Decker said that in an hour they should already be at the main estate of the Draker family. The guy hadn't been here for a long time, only in a past life. An hour later, the carriage was approaching the luxurious estate, and the coachman announced that they had almost arrived at the appointed place. But for some reason, this didn't make the guy happy. He never liked this place, even though it belonged to the Draker family and was located on the territory of the Duchy of Troy. Even though the family's main residence is located in the heart of the continent, in the Fortress of the Four Seasons in the Middle Lands, the ceremony must be held in the main estate. It was here that the legend of the Dragon Slayers began, and it was here that the house was located, which people called the Dragon's Lair. In the main hall of the estate, everyone who was related to the Dragon Slayer family had already gathered and were waiting for the appearance of the main hero of the day. Zeke never realized it, but everyone in the audience was famous, often featured in the Continental News Bulletin. Whatever their intentions, once they all see that the guy can't wake up, they'll probably just ignore him. Finally, Zeke's gaze stopped on one of those present, and it was Abel. But why did he appear? What goals was this impudent fellow pursuing? The guy, shaking the impudent man's hand, asked him directly why he had come to the Dragon's Lair, to which he replied that he had good reasons for it. And the main reason, of course, is his beloved little brother Zeke Draker, whom Abel is happy to see again. Abel Draker was no ordinary knight. He was called the Lion Blade, and in narrow circles he was often called a real butcher behind his back. Zeke mentally asked himself to calm down and not react so harshly to his brother's words. In any case, he couldn't do anything now. In his past life, Abel Draker would never have come to the family estate during the blessing ceremony. Zika. The guy felt completely out of place and mentally asked the higher powers for everything to end quickly and for him to return back to the guys. The family priest announced that the rite ceremony was beginning right now and that Aaron should come out into the hall so that everything would be according to the ritual. A huge bowl of clear liquid was brought into the hall and placed in the center. Everyone simply held their breath, and Zeke walked up to it and dipped his hand into the bowl. At first, everything went as usual, but then Zeke's hand and the liquid began to interact. Strange impulses began to flow through the veins, and they gave off a blue light. Through the rite of blessing, each member of the Draker line awakens their sealed aura when the time comes to leave the cradle. Compared to normal knights who awaken after 20 years, this was incredibly fast and did not pose any problems. All eyes turned to the mana lamps, and no one could understand what was happening to them. A beautiful red glow emanated from them. This meant that the representative of the family was awakening. He was becoming a real knight and taking the color he claimed. Pure blood awakens in young people, and only then can they be called part of the Draker family, and the family accepts them into its home. The master of ceremonies paused for a moment, smiled mysteriously, and asked his assistants to bring special gloves. Due to the suppression of mana, everyone will need to use special gloves made by the family. Otherwise, they will not be able to live a normal life. When someone can prove that they are a purebred dragon slayer, only then are they given the sacred name of Draker and receive the support of that family. Finally, it was Zeke's turn. He walked slowly through the hall and all eyes were drawn to him, because he was able to defeat Reyna Turin herself. He walked very slowly because that was what custom required. Zeke never thought that he would ever have to stand in front of this strange statue again. Last time, everything was frankly terrible, because that time the ritual was the only thing that pushed him to go through the cradle and disgrace himself. However, this time everything will be completely different, because he can now not only heal, but also control the ether. And in addition, he proved himself in the arena during the competition. That's why now he stood in front of this damned bronze statue and asked her to take care of his future. It should be bright. And the statue seemed to hear absolutely all the thoughts of this young man. It stood and sent the guy its pure energy. A few minutes later, the entire ceremony ended. A slight noise swept through the hall and those present began to talk among themselves. Abel stood on the balcony far from everything, where he could conveniently observe what was happening and build his insidious plan. Zeke was a little nervous about the presence of so many spectators, and he was especially annoyed by the presence of Abel, who was staring straight at him. The boy felt his gaze on him throughout the entire ceremony, and it was completely unpleasant for him, despite the fact that Abel was his brother. Despite all of Zeke's efforts, the awakening did not begin, and everyone again thought that he was the loser of the year and would never become a real Draker. Everyone was interested in how he was able to defeat Reyna Turin herself. He probably pulled off some kind of clever scam, but again disgraced the family. He had simply lost all hope, but he didn't really care, because this wasn't the first time this had happened. Now everyone would laugh at him and calm down. The next second, a bright red glow began to pour out of the statue. The awakening process was activated, and everyone simply gasped in surprise. The red color meant only one thing. Zeke Draker was a red knight and belonged to the highest rank of dragon slayers. The terminal established a connection that was activated in the user's soul, and it was worth going through all these circles of hell. Abel watched from the balcony and was simply torn apart by anger that his brother had combined so many superior abilities within himself. Now he won't be the strongest and most influential in their family, because the leadership will be given to his sweet brother, who a year ago was a real scruff. And then the guy thought that from that moment on, everything in his life would change dramatically. Everything would be completely different. There was a little bit of red, so it was all true. He was the Red Knight. That's what Abel thought, looking down at his little brother. Zeke thought that, of course, everyone here would have doubts about him. But in this situation, he should keep quiet. Otherwise, it would only get worse. Everyone noticed the statue, which stood there like a pillar and didn't suspect anything. But people thought that it had simply broken, because Zeke couldn't be red. Abel himself broke the silence, smiling slyly. He asked why everyone here was so sad, since two purebloods had just woken up before their eyes. This is a real reason to celebrate, have a feast, and congratulate the pure-blooded knights who managed to awaken today. And of course, the audience supported Abel Draker's words, and why not? Because this is a wonderful opportunity to have fun in the company of famous people. The Master of Ceremonies once again reminded his assistants that they needed to bring the guy gloves, and they needed to hurry. They couldn't keep the purebred waiting. When Zeke Draker put the gloves on his hands, he immediately noticed the fact that they were quite heavy and he felt uncomfortable wearing them. But there was nothing to be done. He turned around and walked away, giving way to a new contender for pureblood, who was already standing in line. It was obvious that Brother Abel had come to the ceremony specifically because of Zeke, and even a fool could see that he was now making insidious plans regarding him. Abel's intentions were obvious to Zeke, but there was nothing he could do. In this situation, he would have to accept the help of this treacherous relative. But let the brother not think that Zeke has remained a small and naive brat. He can do something too, and is not as stupid as others think. The Master of Ceremonies announced that the blessing ceremony was coming to an end and all guests were invited to the celebration in honor of the manifestation of purebloods. But Zeke didn't give a damn about this pretentious party where everyone would smile in each other's faces and hate everyone. So the guy went to look for a gym. He walked down the corridor and found himself in a secluded part of the estate where no one should disturb him. But as it turned out, he was being watched. A second later, he heard footsteps, and then the voice of his brother, who was following him closely. He asked why Zeke left the party. Zeke hadn't expected Abel to talk to him so quickly. It really surprised him, and he showed with his whole appearance that he wasn't eager to talk. Abel Draker didn't pay attention to this, or made it seem like he didn't pay attention. He extended his hand to Zeke and decided to congratulate his brother on his manifestation. In Zeke's memory, terrible dark images appeared. People near a ruined castle, many dead. Strange sounds. The guy froze for a moment, not intending to extend his hand to shake. Memories swam before his eyes. Abel even felt a little scared. But the brother continued to insist on a handshake. He pretended to smile and showered the younger brother with banal congratulations. An awkward moment ensued. Zeke continued to stand there like a statue, and Abel was starting to get annoyed by this situation. He was clearly starting to get angry. The guy knew one thing for sure. Even now, in order to save face in front of the public, he still would not be able to shake hands with this arrogant liar. Abel realized that he wouldn't be shaking the hand of the purebred who had appeared today. So he made a face of disappointment and said that he was very glad to meet him. He simply patted the guy on the shoulder, wished him success in his future knightly endeavors, and demonstratively headed toward the exit of the hall. The older brother finally said that they would see each other again, and this was what Zeke wanted the least. He did not want to meet this man again at all. The guest room was noisy, the guests had relaxed a little and were engaged in casual conversation, mainly discussing Zeke Draker's manifestation. But the guy decided not to listen to this nonsense and went straight to his room. He wanted to quickly take off this stupid suit and be alone with his thoughts. Having freed himself from the excess clothing, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes from the feeling of lightness. Now it was all behind him. He could simply relax in silence. He couldn't get the thought out of his head about what was really happening to him, because all purebloods have the ability to suppress mana. This ability proves that a human is capable of resisting dragons, the source of mana. However, most machines use mana as fuel, which is why purebloods wear gloves. If he really was a purebred, then as soon as Zeke took the glove off his hand, there would have been problems. So he turned to the virtual tablet and opened the status window, because this was unlike anything that had happened to him before. He didn't suppress mana, but reflected it, which means that reflection is classified as a skill. And before the ritual, he was a rare rank healer. Now his status is considered even higher and is called a unique immortal. But how is this possible if all the graduates awakened with a blue aura, and he had a red one? At first it glowed a bright red light, and then it changed completely to gold, and he could not give a logical explanation for it. The system then reported that the terminal had lost information regarding class classification, and that the terminal referred to the statue itself. But as soon as the system entered the required information, the standing bronze statue immediately began to emit a red light. That's exactly what happened. It turns out the bronze statue doesn't determine whether you're awake or not. It determines the user's disposition and class. Red was considered a very rare color and was only radiated by a select few. But gold was completely unique and was only possessed by a limited number of people. Zeke read that the bronze statue was an ancient relic that was used even before Terracon. Draker, the founder of their family. Nowadays, the concept of class doesn't even exist, so it was used solely to test whether a person would awaken or not. It is now clear that they misinterpreted the red glow, which meant a rare class and the awakening of purebloods, but no one knew this until today. Zeke Draker became a unique member of this family, and he received abilities that had not been used before him. This is Dragon Vision and Dragon Power. It was all good, but the guy expected to get more information, but in fact nothing much changed. But the more he looked at the ability activation window, the more it seemed to him that the bronze statue could move and was approaching him directly. Zik even went out onto the balcony to breathe easier. Maybe it would be more pleasant to perceive this reality in the fresh air. A message appeared on the screen indicating that Zeke could request detailed information about whatever he was currently interested in. Of course, he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity and ask about every detail in this house, because this is where the family's history began. His whole body was aching from an incomprehensible pain, and he couldn't understand its cause. If all the dragon's skills were like this, then he wouldn't be able to use them often. The activation window displayed a message that there was an option to use the healing ability, but he had no intention of activating it now. He was surprised by the statistics information. It turned out that all of his class skills had become passive, and all of their levels had increased by 1. He read that according to the system, his body is capable of self-healing, and this applies to his passive skills. One might think that the healing process has long been overcome, but it is not something that can be neglected forever. The healing effect of his abilities was quite limited, which cannot be said about his healing factor, because it was infinite, and this was pleasing. That's why Zeke decided to conduct an experiment on his body and took a kitchen knife in his hands, then made a cut on his hand in the forearm area. Now he will understand how much his body can heal itself and regenerate cells. If everything is correct, the wound should heal. Indeed, after some time, the drops of blood miraculously disappeared somewhere, and his hand did not show a single sign of a cut. It turns out that this works, and even very well, and if everyone studies at the academy for 5 years, then he will be able to graduate from the educational institution in just 2 years. Draker Academy was the most famous knight academy on the continent, and anyone would sacrifice everything to be admitted there. The new semester here began at the beginning of spring, and young men dreaming of becoming knights flocked here from all over the continent. Students with higher ratings were no different from adults. They were all trained to perfection and did not require additional training. However, if we compare these young people with those who study in the cradle, they will still remain descendants of noble families. Everyone here fought for their place in the sun and authority among teachers and classmates because their future depended on it. Among the many different families that supported the Draker family, there were 3 families that were the most influential and had the ear of absolutely everyone. The Turin family, famous throughout the continent, was a model of strength, and it was to them that the girl named Reina, with whom Zeke fought, belonged. The second family in importance was considered to be their ancient wisdom, and if any issue needed to be resolved, they were the ones they turned to. The majestic Wardic family supported the entire continent financially, for there was no one richer on this land. The children from these 3 families, of course, enjoyed authority and their position in society. They, understandably, were different from others. But Zika didn't really care about this. He wasn't planning on making friends with anyone here, much less gaining anyone's trust. Like all the other students, he was sent to a high-ranking dormitory called the Platinum Mansion, and that's where the guy headed. The building bore little resemblance to a dormitory. The premises were equipped with a study hall, a library, a gym, and other amenities. But all this was only available to the highest-ranked students, and even from the cradle it was difficult to get here. Such a chance was given only to pure-blooded awakened ones. There was a whole floor equipped for them, known under the unofficial name of Platinum, where students were met at the entrance by maids. Next, the student entered the common hall, where teachers, assistants, servants, and other personnel necessary for the educational process were waiting for him. Having reached the floor he needed, Zeke was a little taken aback, because even for pure-blooded awakened ones from the elite families, this was too luxurious. The guy was told that his personal assistant Decker was waiting for him in the room, where the tongue immediately went. Once in his room, away from the noise and people, the boy saw a beautiful velvet chest on the table. Decker handed it over, saying that it was a gift. Without thinking twice, the guy opened the chest and took out beautiful black gloves made of thin leather. He immediately put them on. Then V decided out loud that since he already had new gloves, it would be great to get a new sword as well. These areas are rich in high-quality materials and skilled craftsmen who make weapons exclusively for the Academy's students. Decker, of course, offered to find the guy a worthy master who could make swords from the best steel, but he refused. He had one professional in mind, so he gave his assistant his contact information to arrange a meeting. Decker had never heard of Master Galeon before. Halbert, but promised to contact the man. Then Zeke began to study his schedule. Classes were supposed to start that day, and this made the guy very happy. Considering that the Platinum floor is completely isolated, it will have much more freedom to develop the dragon's skills. There was a knock at the door and a maid appeared on the threshold. The woman informing him that Mrs. Reina Turun had sent him an invitation to dinner. Zeke didn't expect this at all, and didn't understand why the girls wanted to have dinner with him, but he accepted the invitation anyway. Half an hour later, he was already heading to a small restaurant near the academy, thinking about a pleasant get-together with his former rival. But everything turned out to be much more banal. Reina Turun was not alone, but in the presence of several knights, and they were quite aggressive. The tongue realized that the girl was the owner of the floor, and the people in her family were quite peculiar. One had to be extremely careful. The guy came closer and sat down opposite the girl, then thanked Reina for the invitation. He was very pleased. Without further ado, the girl took the menu and suggested they have a snack first, and Zeke noticed that she was using her lower abdomen to control her aura. Vague guesses began to creep into Draker's head. Could it be that Reina was preparing to become a purple knight? But judging by the way she fought, her swordsmanship had stagnated, and now she was wasting her time on some dinners instead of training. But there was nothing to be done. He had to act according to the situation, because the guy knew that Reina Turun had not just invited him to eat. So, after they finished dessert, Zeke Draker decided to ask straight out why he had been invited here. The girl said that her family is ready to give Zeke Draker their full support, because it seems he has the wrong idea about pure-blooded awakened ones. Yes, such students have many privileges at the academy. The Platinum floor alone is proof that they are not ordinary people, but they do not receive any benefits in terms of their development. And the academy has accumulated centuries of theoretical and practical knowledge. To effectively improve one's abilities, one must have a personal instructor. If one is not available, no matter how well off the student is, he will fall behind. This is why support is necessary, because even Abel Draker, who is a Black Knight, received support from his maternal family, the glorious Simmons family. Although the head of the Turin family did not explain the reason, he said that Zeke does not receive support from his maternal family. So Reina Turin asks again if Zeke Draker is ready to receive the necessary support during his studies from the Turin clan. After thinking for a minute, the guy smiled mysteriously, thanked the girl for her concern, but politely refused the support of the Turin family. Reina did not understand or appreciate this behavior, because supporting her family was a rather advantageous solution for the guy. But Zeke explained that that wasn't the issue. He didn't need anything beyond what he had by right as an awakened pureblood. He thanked Reina and headed for the exit. And in gratitude for the dinner, he gave the girl one piece of advice: not to treat the people around her so well. He also said that Reina Turin's sword had too much power and that it needed to be used correctly, otherwise it would lose its resource. Reina Turin's greatest strength was her ability to move, and it arose from her flexible body. Zeke advised not to attack your opponents head-on during a fight, but to use your flexibility and dodge attacks. The smoothness of her movements should help her with this, and as Zeke noted, she has mastered this ability very well. Since she is still a fragile girl, her blows must be precise but very smooth, so she will always be the winner. If Reina Turun listens to his advice, she will definitely be the winner in the next tournament, he has no doubt about it. Finally, he thanked me once again for the delicious dinner and took his leave, citing urgent business that had come up. The girl never expected such behavior from this newly minted hero. In anger, she even jumped up from the table and slammed her fist on its surface. What he doesn't understand is that the Turin family is the embodiment of strength, and he rejects the help they kindly offer. And it's not at all that she pays attention to her surroundings, and it's not that she lost the tournament to him. She was simply obsessed with the idea of becoming a person who is truly worthy of bearing the glorious name of the Turin family. And this guy was able to see what she sometimes tried not to notice, because as a child she was often called a genius child, but no one gave her such advice. For a moment, she thought that she wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of this mysterious and insightful guy named Zeke Draker. He ran as fast as he could, thus testing his infinite endurance skill. In his past life, this place seemed like a real hell on earth to him. But now, having awakened, he realized that he had ended up in a very good paradise. Money and power over most of the continent were not everything. He finally realized that there was nothing better than this feeling in his chest that he was experiencing now. The boy was simply strolling around the academy grounds, enjoying the silence and solitude, but he noticed that he was being closely watched from afar. Zeke stopped and decided to find out what was going on. Who was so eager to get on his nerves since the morning? Looking closer, he saw Owen Zimmons walking towards him. The guy was not alone. He was accompanied by a whole delegation of students. His gait was sharp, and his appearance was very self-confident. This self-confident idiot thought that by humiliating Zeke Draker, he could increase his status among the students, but now everything has changed. Aries came closer and asked why Zeke ignored his invitation to dinner last night. Was it possible that he didn't receive the letter? Zimmons' answer was a little shocking in its simplicity, because Zeke replied that he had seen the letter on his desk, but he hadn't bothered to open it and read it. Draker's subsequent words completely threw his opponent off balance. Zeke said that he was not going to answer every person he met's letters. One of Zimmons' escorts stepped forward and reminded him that Zeke was standing in front of one of the representatives of the most influential family on the continent, so he should be a little more polite. But Zeke didn't really react to this. On the contrary, he calmly asked the stranger who he was and what he was doing here. The guy thought to himself that everyone who comes here from the cradle is nothing special, so he didn't stand on ceremony. He simply turned around and said that if the guy wants to show off in front of his master, then he should also not forget who he is talking to now. Zeke Draker is far from the last person in the Night Academy, so people like this big guy should always know their place and not show off too much. But then the stranger decided to show what he was capable of and suddenly released his aura, so much so that Zeke even staggered. And the stranger shouted after him that his name was Durbin Roswell and that everyone here called him the Mighty Durbin. Zeke should remember that. Draker chuckled. Why did a cadet who wasn't even a knight have a nickname? And why was he protecting Owen Zimmons? Zeke suddenly ran up to the thug and decided to teach him a good lesson in politeness, because no one here had ever allowed such rudeness towards him. Within minutes, the large and mighty Durbin Roswell was lying on the ground, blood flowing from his nose. Zeke Draker then turned to young Aries, who had decided not to get his hands dirty in battle, and suggested that he make his choice quickly. The guy reminded him that sending huge, physically fit guys to humiliate him was a very bad idea. Aries was never one to mince words, so he promised in front of witnesses that he would still have a chance to take revenge on Draker, and that this chance would come soon. The conflict was resolved and Zeke Draker went to the courtyard of the Night Academy. But something strange was happening there. There were a lot of people on the street. Academy was divided into two classes, with the regular classes being for those with no talent at all. These cadets had to put in a lot of effort to achieve anything, so they trained from early morning until late at night. But Zeke Draker belonged to the second class, where the elite studied, who chose their own subjects, everything except the basic ones. Well, for some reason, Draker didn't grasp the difference between these two classes. Both had strict discipline and demanding teachers. The administrator entered the lecture hall and announced that someone quite exceptional would be giving a lecture to the first-year students of the special class today. The guys even perked up a little. Everyone was curious about who their lecturer would turn out to be, probably some big shot. The door swung open and Howard Draker himself, the owner and director of this academy, entered the auditorium. The man was elderly, but looked very well-groomed and pleasant. He greeted the students and began to give the first lecture. Everyone knew this man very well. He was a war hero and a genius of tactical combat. But Zeke Draker wasn't happy to see the guest because he considered this man a real traitor. And it was because of him that the guy had to drop out of the academy. He lost the only place he could belong to, so he had to wander throughout the Duchy of Troy. But it didn't last long, because Zeke Draker was eventually captured and then sold for a good price to the Southern Cartel. Therefore, Zeke looked angrily at the elderly professor and mentally promised himself that he would definitely take revenge on this man for all his troubles. After the lecture, the administrator announced that the group would begin basic training, so everyone took their swords and headed to the arena. A special indoor arena was built for a special class of elite representatives to provide students with a comfortable training environment. Zeke Draker. It was incredibly boring, because who would have thought that a special class would have to study the art of slaying dragons? In his past life, simply because he didn't know how to use his aura, he spent 2 years learning what would take an ordinary person 3 months. He really hoped that this time it would be much easier, because he simply would not survive a second such episode in his life. Then the teacher came out to them and introduced himself. His name was Andre Draker, and in the coming months he would be teaching the group the art of dragon slaying. A slight murmur ran through the young people. Everyone began to whisper, because the teacher's appearance really impressed them. Despite not being a pure-blooded awakened, Andre Draker graduated from the academy early with honors and was a true genius of the kind that only comes along once in a century. The teachers of this class were on a completely different level, and Andre was also known for his unyielding character. The students sensed this immediately because the man shouted at them to be quiet as he was starting his lesson. Andre Draker decided to stand on ceremony with his students, so he asked the young men to immediately draw their swords. Draker hesitated a little. He failed to draw his sword effectively, and the teacher took notice of this. Well, the next minute the guy tried again and demonstrated all his sword skills. It turned out quite impressive. Then the tongue stopped, defiantly turned to the teacher and handed him his training sword. Andre Draker seemed slightly surprised, as he had not expected such dexterity from an ordinary student, albeit one belonging to the elite class. Without saying another word, the teacher pointed his hand towards the arena, indicating for Zeke to follow him. The guy, of course, came out and then said that he was sure that he could defeat the teacher with this sword. Andre wondered if this student really had enough skills to defeat an experienced warrior in a duel. The teacher decided to teach the young, impudent boy a lesson and proposed an academic competition, to which Zeke confidently agreed. The conditions were simple. If Zeke could at least touch the teacher's body with his blade, he would immediately be released from classes. But Andre warned the boy that the fight would be tough and brutal, so the student should be constantly on guard. The offer was more than attractive, and besides, Zeke was 100% sure that he would be able to defeat the teacher. Andre, in turn, warned the cadet that he did not intend to use his aura against him, so that the fight would be fair. Zeke understood that these statements were quite loud, and that he could well defeat Andre. But considering that Abel was watching him, he decided not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. He thought that the fight would be very short and quite easy because he just needed to hit the teacher's body, and that would be it. They decided not to drag out the competition, and the two guys immediately rushed to attack each other in order to quickly end this stupid argument. Andre suddenly thought that the Blue Knight that he was would easily teach this little impudent fellow a lesson, since this was not his first time. To the surprise of the opponents, as well as all the spectators, the fight was very hot. No one wanted to give in, showing by their actions that they were determined to win. Whispers began to form in the stands, and the spectators split into two camps. Some were rooting for Andre and were glad that Zeke hadn't managed to injure the teacher in half an hour. Andre Draker was already a little tired because he thought that it would be easy for him to defeat this boy in just a few minutes. This situation began to gradually get on his nerves. He had promised not to release his aura, but now he realized that he could lose to a simple cadet. And the very existence of purebloods and their manifestation seemed to the teacher to be a rather unfair phenomenon of this world. The Drakers' method of cultivating aura is known for its peculiarity. They activate it during their daily activities without even noticing it. Roughly speaking, Andre simply stopped breathing now. His unconventional swordplay further reduced his endurance. But losing to an opponent like that wasn't quite right. So Zeke thought for a second and lost his balance, which led to consequences. There was nothing to be done. The guy would have to unbalance the teacher and force him to reveal his aura. He thought that it was useless to make any attacks that your opponent could easily deal with. It was a waste of energy. So Zeke Draker decided to come up with something that would make his opponent unknowingly use their aura release. An extreme situation would be a good way to do this, and Zeke will immediately do it to his opponent. We need to see what comes of it. Zeke Draker decided to attack from behind. For this, he jumped high enough and decided to strike the enemy with a sword from behind. This should shock him. It was the art of swift steps that his opponent possessed, and Zeke realized this during the fight, so he decided to use his knowledge. This was just what the boy needed, because the teacher became furious and unconsciously began to release his aura to stop this boy. And that was all Zeke Draker needed to wait for. He immediately realized that the teacher's tactics had changed dramatically, which meant the guy was doing the right thing. In the stands, those who were rooting for Andre even stood up from their seats, because their teacher had begun to control the situation and had to win. Zeke Draker had been quietly observing the audience and the teacher's behavior, and what he saw was pleasing, but it was truly difficult. Now it was possible to pass out, lose consciousness, and pretend to be dead for a more colorful effect. And the guy fell to the ground. Andre calmly looked at the guy who flew a couple of meters and fell painfully onto the concrete. He didn't feel sorry for Zeke. But suddenly the teacher shouted across the entire training hall that a cadet named Zeke Draker could skip his classes from that day on. The teacher then asked if there were any other people who wanted to get officially dismissed from his classes by fighting him in combat. He slowly glanced at everyone present, but everyone was silent, their heads lowered to the floor. There were no volunteers. Everyone was afraid. Just half an hour after the fight, Zeke Draker was lying in a hospital bed at the local infirmary of the Knight Academy, enjoying his ingenuity. Yes, he was unable to touch Andre's body with his sword. But that's not important now. In this situation, what's important is that he forced the teacher to use his aura. As a result, the teacher had to be punished for arranging a competition with a cadet. And Zeke had enough time to rest and think. But it is also worth noting that Andre Drake's last attack was a basic move in the art of dragon slaying, but its power was incredible. He can still defeat the Blue Knight, given his limitless stamina and ability to completely heal his body. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a strange stranger appeared in the room, and this man looked very much like an ordinary tramp, and a drunk one at that. The man looked at him for a long time, and then suddenly asked Zeke if he was Arthur Draker's youngest son, and again reached for the bottle of drink. He continued to methodically drink and talk about how the guy had the same eyes as that scoundrel Arthur. It turned out that the stranger was well aware of the fight between Zeke and his teacher, and was now commenting on the current situation. The man reminded Draker that he had received a fairly serious blow during the fight, but it turned out that his wound had somehow miraculously disappeared instantly. He then reminded them that there had never been anyone in the academy who possessed such skills, and Zeke continued to play the fool and pretended not to understand what the stranger was saying. And then it dawned on Zeke that this man who had snuck into his hospital room was a hired killer, and that perhaps these were the last minutes of his life. He suddenly grabbed the sheet and tried to throw it over the killer's face in order to buy at least a few seconds of time. He hadn't come up with another plan yet. One thing was clear. If Zeke didn't kill this maniac now, everything could end before it even began, and tomorrow all the cadets would gather for his funeral. The man easily dodged the blow and threw the sheet over his eyes. He said that Zeke's skills were very similar to those of a professional mercenary. Then he laughed, and the guy felt goosebumps. Who was he? This stranger. And most importantly, who sent him to Zeke? The fight began. Very active and scary. It was clear that this man was quite proficient with weapons. But Zeke didn't back down either. He prepared for the stranger's attack and took an advantageous position. He needed to find out who it was. I wonder if this man knows anything about Zeke Draker's past life. It was very important to the guy. The stranger Echidna smiled and said that the guy looked more like a good mercenary than a noble knight. There was a huge gap between their abilities, so big that if the stranger had wanted to, he could have easily killed Zeke. For a moment the guy even thought that this man might be stronger than the Red Knight himself. But who sent him here? While the stranger turned away, Zeke decided to take a few steps back to buy himself some time. But the killer quickly caught up with him. And then, suddenly for Zeke and his mysterious visitor, Andre Draker appeared at the door of the room. The teacher recognized the stranger as the well-known caretaker of the academic garden, Mr. Dexter. The gardener tensed up and asked Andre how he knew that he would show up at the young cadet's ward. The teacher replied that he saw him among the spectators in the stands. Then he turned to Zeke and ordered the boy to return to his studies. Finally, Dexter shouted to the young cadet to visit the academy's western greenhouse. He would teach him something useful. The guy stood in the middle of the room and was silent. So much had happened in one day that he was completely confused about who was his friend and who was his enemy. Zeke thanked Dexter for the invitation, but had to politely decline. He didn't want to meet the man again. The guy didn't believe a single word Andre said. This stranger couldn't possibly be an ordinary gardener looking after fragile plants. He was a real killer. If he has a rank that allows a man to call the current head by his first name, then he is definitely not a simple gardener. He is probably the same man who had only one student in his entire life, and he is Duke Draker. This was one of those very black knights who were capable of taking on an entire kingdom single-handedly. It was luck that this man disappeared a long time ago without telling anyone, but who would have thought that he had been hiding in the academy all this time? Perhaps Teacher Andre came to his senses precisely because of him. Perhaps he knew that Duke was right here. Rumor has it that Duke only achieved the Black Knight status because he liked the color black so much. This man is currently showing great interest in Zeke Draker. But getting some easy training out of simple interest is exactly what he needs. If Zeke was going to learn anything at this academy, he should at least learn the secret trick and turn his curiosity into perseverance. The theory of magic at the Knights Academy was taught by Professor Fannin. He was a very interesting and intelligent man. But for some reason, during this man's lectures, everyone was terribly sleepy, so only a few followed the man's flow of thoughts. Professor Fanon was so engrossed in his work that he didn't even notice that only a few people were listening to his lecture. Everyone else was simply sleeping. But Zeke listened attentively to the teacher and even asked questions when he didn't understand something that the lecturer was saying. Fanon was very happy when he was asked questions, because this was evidence to Val that the students were listening to him attentively. Most of the days of study at the Night Academy passed in such a monotonous and uniform manner. But Zeke tried not to complain about anything. Others complained, especially about the fact that at the Night Academy, cadets were supposed to teach magic. One day, after the lecture, Professor Fanon asked the boy to stay in the auditorium for a few minutes. He thanked Zeke Draker for listening attentively, and if there was anything else he was interested in, Fanon would be happy to help. Zeke thought that the professor was an unusual magician. He didn't even guess that Fanon was a graduate of the Magical University of Delphi, the country where magic originated. So the boy thought that there would be nothing wrong if he made friends with the magic professor. He could teach him a lot. A few days later, while walking around the academy's courtyard, the boy noticed a familiar figure on a bench and decided to approach. Of course, it was the academy's gardener Dexter, who had been waiting for Zeke for a long time and was lounging leisurely on the bench. Without much ceremony, the man immediately asked the boy why he had ignored the invitation and not come to his greenhouse. There was no way this guy couldn't understand what Dexter meant when he said he would teach him something useful. But the guy repeated once again that he wasn't interested in it. He already had a lot of individual assignments, so there was no point in waiting for him. But then the academy's gardener raised his hand, and Zeke saw that a bright blue color was pouring out of it. Now that was interesting. When the guy came to, he realized that he had lost consciousness from Dexter's blow and was now in the greenhouse. It turns out that the gardener, not having waited for his visit, decided to take him to his greenhouse in such a strange way. He quickly found Dexter and asked why the man had beaten him and kidnapped him, and they would be looking for him. Dexter calmly replied that this was his simple plan, because otherwise the guy would not have come to him. Here I was sure that now was not the time to make friends or have any other relationship with this strange man, so I tried to run away. But just a second later, some magical force pinned the guy to the ground, and Dexter immediately appeared behind him. The man smiled crookedly and said that the boy wouldn't be able to escape, even if he tried in vain. The gardener asked again how all of Zeke's wounds and injuries healed so quickly. But the guy decided to go to the bank. He said that if the man was so interested in it, then he should make him answer. But then the most interesting thing began. Zeke expected the man to hit him, or something like that. But the gardener simply disappeared. A minute later, the guy felt some strange energy near him. He immediately realized that Dexter was near him. Zeke pulled out his sword and began swinging it at random, hoping that this way he would hit the gardener and injure him. But it was not to be. Zeke heard footsteps, and then Dexter's silhouette itself, which was gradually moving away. He was running away. Finally, the gardener shouted that if Zeke could at least touch him, he would fulfill one of the boy's wishes. Dexter could only marvel at the boy's endurance. 3 hours had already passed and Zeke was still looking for him. The guy didn't even stop in front of the high stone wall and decided to climb up there to check where the gardener was hiding. Dexter watched the guy and noted to himself that Draker would stop at nothing. His stamina and wounds were restored instantly. This little guy will still prove himself, and it will happen quite soon, and maybe Dexter will help him with this. The man understood that, if necessary, the boy would activate the skills of the healing factor and infinite stamina. Early language Draker knew about the dragon's power, but he found this skill quite dangerous, so he did not use it earlier. But now is the time to reconsider and take advantage of this opportunity against the Black Knight, which Dexter definitely is. Zeke decided that he would expose this strange man at any cost, so the game continues. Then the boy heard the gardener's voice. The man was mocking him and asking Zeke to show his real self. Out of confusion and despair, the young man pulled out his sword and began swinging it from side to side, showing that he was serious. The gardener noticed that the boy was repeating the same technique. He might be fast, but compared to teacher Andre or Reina Tarun, he still seemed like nothing. However, the man liked the malice and fearlessness in his eyes. One could only envy the persistence of this boy. Zeke decided to take extreme measures and activate the dragon's power, so he could use a little of his aura, and it should give results. But for some reason, the guy couldn't do anything. Dexter quickly and successfully repelled all attacks, but at one point, everything fell into place. Aura began to act and Zeke desperately went on the attack, blinding the enemy with his energy. He deprived the Black Knight of visibility, but he decided to show all his strength, so he warned the guy that it would be even more difficult. But Zeke was already prepared for this, because a minute ago he decided to activate the Dragon Vision skill. It will definitely help him. At one point, he almost caught up with the strange gardener, but it turned out that the man simply disappeared before his eyes. All that remained of the Black Knight were the footprints in the sand, and they quickly disappeared in a gust of wind. And he was gone again. This is why Duke Draker was called the Black Knight, or the Storm Knight, because with a simple jerk the man could cause terrible gusts of wind. A few seconds later, the gardener appeared again and began to attack the guy, but he activated all his abilities and successfully fought back. After some time, due to excessive use of skills, Zeke's fatigue exceeded the permissible limit. The system forcibly disabled all the skills in use, and the guy could only make out the silhouette of the gardener, who was moving away. A little later, the guy realized that he had just fought with the strongest knight on this continent. Zeke Draker had absolutely no memory of how he ended up in his elite dorm room. The guy slowly got up on the bed and looked around. Apparently, the knight had personally brought him here and put him to bed. At this point, the guy did everything he could, but it was not enough. He tried to weaken the knight's vigilance by repeating the same attack over and over again. At the decisive moment, with the help of the dragon's power and the dragon's vision, he wanted to strike Duke, but alas, he did not have enough strength. Now Zeke realized that he had actually passed out due to overusing his dragon skills. But he was able to see the Black Knight's secret technique, which was using mindless, incredibly fast movements thanks to his extremely trained body. It must have been this secret technique that allowed Andre, who had weak stamina, to rise to the level of a Red Knight. Zeke felt sorry that he missed the opportunity to learn the secret technique, but it was worth it. The dragon's power exerts such a huge pressure that it makes even the Black Knight hesitate. Most cadets would give up immediately once they encountered this skill. The virtual tablet beeped. Remind me of unread messages. They said that Zeke Draker's soul had been divorced, thanks to a display of willpower, and he also received karma points. The guy then read that 45 points were needed to unlock his system and restore it, but at the moment the guy only had 40. Then he looked at the menu bar where he could select the desired inventory. This inventory could be constantly increased. That is, the guy could activate skills just by thinking about them. So he began to visualize the sword he would need. The claymore disappeared and took up 2 of the 28 spaces available in the inventory, which is what was meant by the message about the space the item occupied. At first, Zeke thought it would be some kind of subspace storage, but everything turned out to be much better. Of course, this artifact was expensive, but finding something to store it in was not at all easy. I wonder what will happen when he reaches a higher rank. If the value of these points is so high, then he will not be able to throw them away mindlessly. Well, it looks like the guy will have to change his plans, which were already changing because there was a knock on the door, and Decker appeared on the threshold. The guy didn't want to see anyone, so he sadly asked why the assistant had disturbed his peace. The man, without saying a word, handed the boy a note. It was from a stranger, but he said that Zeke would understand if Decker said the word gardener. Without thinking twice, Zeke snatched the note from his assistant and unfolded it, where Dexter said the guy could come whenever he wanted if he wanted to fight again. The young man immediately remembered that the gardener had called their duel a draw, which meant he wanted to meet again. The guy smiled maliciously. Fate itself was giving him the opportunity to find out more information about the Black Prince's techniques. Decker also informed the guy that he had found the blacksmith that Zeke had spoken of. But the problem was that this master was refusing to meet with Draker. The guy didn't like this at all because how could an ordinary master refuse the heir of one of the most ancient and influential families? The assistant sadly reported that this weaponsmith unfortunately no longer makes balls. The very next morning, Zeke Draker stood in front of the swordmaster's house. He decided to check for himself why this man had refused him. The workshop had a name, and on the wall hung a sign that read Panpier's Breath, which seemed too loud to the guy for such a place. Without thinking twice, the young man opened the door and asked if there was anyone alive in the house, as there was real chaos going on there. Master Graham sat at the table, now in a sorry state. But earlier, he had created a sword that had the ability that the language needed most, the ability to change ether into aura. The greatest blacksmith on the continent, who forged this sword, was now drinking heavily and had not touched work for a long time. Master Graham looked listlessly at Zeke Draker and told him to get lost. This was no place for children. Although he was a rather picky person, he never reached such a terrible state, so what happened to him? Without thinking twice, Zeke Draker grabbed a bucket of cold water and doused the man from head to toe. He didn't even have time to scream. Without thinking twice, Zeke Draker grabbed a bucket of cold water and doused the man from head to toe. He didn't even have time to scream. When the master came to his senses a little, the boy asked why he had rejected his offer to make a powerful sword. The man examined the boy for a long time until he saw his gloves with the Draker family coat of arms, and this horrified him. He immediately fell on his knees in forgiveness for the young master seeing him and his house in such a shameful state. Now he doesn't take orders because he doesn't want to create something that someone else has come up with, and he's not able to do what he wants himself. Graham probably didn't want to share his problems and never talked about the way he lived, because Zeke knew him from his past life. Now the master considered himself useless, but the boy could not wait 10 years for him to come to his senses and become the greatest master. Graham was still asking for forgiveness, I don't know why, and Zeke ordered him to show a couple of his other works. The master had to take the guy to the backyard and reluctantly show him all the results of his work. The entire courtyard looked like a weapons field, with dozens of swords stuck into the ground, and the sight was amazing. Zeke walked between the swords as if through a museum, examining each unique exhibit. The man warned the boy to be careful, because although the swords were not perfect, they were still quite sharp. These were far from disastrous balls. They were no different in quality from those that the best master on the continent had produced. Zeke had to activate his dragon vision ability so he could get a better look at the sword he liked. After examining the weapon for a long time, the guy concluded that Graham had some problems with the brazier and they needed to be fixed immediately. The man's eyes widened in surprise. How did this boy know that his brazier was broken? Draker understood that this craftsman had his own unique style of work, using several types of metal to create a lighter and more refined material. But when it comes to the durability of the products, Graham still needs to experiment and create his best creation. This happens because the impurities present in the metals were not properly removed during the calcination process. The master continued to be amazed, because Draker not only recognized his smelting method, but also found the main drawback and its cause. Graham was silent for a while and then said quietly that he would like to ask the young master for something, and he nodded in agreement. The master invited the guy into his office, rummaged through his desk for a long time, and then pulled out some strange drawings and showed them to the guy to look at. Zeke Draker asked Graham to unfold the drawings so he could understand what was shown. It turned out that this was Graham's secret, which he would reveal many years later. The drawing was a drawing of a magic brazier. It was a drawing of a magical brazier, the temperature of which was maintained by magic. This was the master's secret. Graham knew that his work would certainly interest the boy, because with this invention his smelting method would become flawless. Zeke Draker was tired of wondering why, despite having all the plans, Graham hadn't yet brought his project to life. But the master sighed heavily and said that he still needed a diagram of the law of mana energy. But the commission of the magic tower was very large. He did not have that kind of money. The guy thought that in order to save up the required amount, it would take the master at least 10 years, and this is completely absurd. Language even thought about the fact that such a talented master as Graham definitely needs help, both financially and morally. But the master got ahead of him and said that if Draker helped him with the brazier, he would carry out any of the boy's orders. At that moment, Zeke thought that even for him, a purebred knight from a powerful family, it would be difficult to obtain support of 10,000 gold. But he couldn't refuse Master Graham's shining sword, so he needed help solving the problems with the law of mana energy. After thinking for a little while and without saying anything about his thoughts to Graham, Zeke loudly replied that he agreed to such a deal. He then told the master that he needed to consult with a very famous magician, and when he found out something, he would inform Graham. Finally, the guy asked the master to pull himself together from that day on and stop drinking alcohol by the barrel. Graham himself didn't know that he was so sentimental. He burst into tears of happiness and thanked her 1,000 times. The young knight jumped into the carriage, throwing a parting word to the master that he would contact him again in the near future. The next day, Zeke decided to visit the professor of the phenomenon and headed to the research building of the Draker Academy. The guy knew very well that Fanon specialized in developing the laws of mana energy, so he decided to contact him. The professor's research laboratory was located in some dark alley. Upon entering, the guy heard a strange noise. Next, Zeke saw a cadet kneeling, singing along with the people and asking for forgiveness from Sir Leon Conrad. Leon kicked the guy again and began to humiliate him with the most terrible words, feeling his complete superiority. The victim didn't even resist anymore. The guy curled up and tried to somehow protect his face with his hands. Without thinking twice, Zeke leaped up to the group of offenders in 2 leaps and decided to quickly restore order and justice. Leon didn't notice Draker, so he called the guy the same worthless person as Zeke himself, promising that he would destroy both Draker and him. The previously unseen golden glow, the awakening of a pureblood who surpassed the rest, all of this still tormented this boor. And now, Leon Conrad was taking out all his anger and resentment on some helpless cadet from the lower class, feeling superior to the victim. He lost to Zeke Draker because he chose a surprise attack technique that Lion could never have expected. But the thought that the one he thought was pure trash turned out to be a pure-blooded awakened from the Great Bloodline. Suddenly, Leon Conrad heard a familiar voice behind him, warning him that he had 3 seconds to take his hands off the poor guy. No one present expected to see Zeke Draker standing opposite and watching this shameless picture. Leon Conrad was absolutely furious when he spotted his most sworn enemy. Zeke had become overly arrogant since he woke up. But Draker was very serious. There was absolutely no emotion on his face. He just looked at Leon and ordered him to kneel. Although he was putting on a brave face, he sensed a direct danger in Dick Draker's steely voice. He probably went a bit too far. But further disgrace was not an option. So Leon Conrad tried his best to save his face and reputation, both in front of his friends and in front of Zeke. Just a couple of months ago, this arrogant fellow was crawling at his feet and begging for mercy. But now Leon himself could end up in his place. Clenching all his composure into a fist, Leon shouted that Zeke Draker had no right to tell him how to behave in the academy. Otherwise, he might regret it. Leon Conrad then decided to involve his friends in his defense and ordered his brothers to beat the guy up properly. Zeke Draker foresaw this situation and immediately warned his rivals' friends so that they would not regret their decision later. The first to rush to Leon's defense was his best friend, who shouted that in a couple of minutes all that would remain of Zeke would be a wet spot. But not even a minute had passed before this daredevil was already lying on the ground and asking Draker for forgiveness for his behavior. The others decided that there was no point in fighting Zeke alone, so they began attacking him in 2s and 3s. A fairly large-scale fight broke out, and from the outside it was unclear who was in the lead and who would end up being beaten half to death. Screams and strange noises spread throughout the entire courtyard of the academy. Some of those present were already asking for mercy, some were trying to quickly run away. The cunning Leon Conrad miraculously extricated himself from the fight and decided to observe everything from the sidelines. For the first time, he was truly afraid for his life. Having scattered all his friends to the sides, Zeke finally found his opponent with his gaze and began to slowly move towards him. They looked into each other's eyes, realizing that the conflict between them was not yet over. They had to continue. Leon, out of fear, drew his sword and prepared to fight Zeke Draker using bladed weapons. Draker reminded his opponent that cadets were forbidden from retrieving balls outside the training hall, so their duel would end in the death of one of the participants. A battered Liam Stone raised his head and said that he agreed to be a witness to their fight, with all responsibility falling on the loser. Well, then Leon Conrad dropped to his knees and pulled Liam along with him, and they tearfully began to apologize to the guy for their behavior. Zeke involuntarily recalled how a year ago he himself had suffered terrible beatings and humiliation from these people, and each time he had begged them for mercy, but no one had listened to him. It was at these moments that he felt real anger. He could now take revenge and kill both of these fools, but of course Zeke did not do this. He swung his sword and at one point hit Leon Conrad's ear, saying that for the first time such a punishment would be enough for this abnormal person. Zeke Draker then warned that if he ever met this bully again, he would definitely lose his head. The guy turned around and decided to leave the scene of the bloody clashes. He was actually heading towards Professor Fannin, but he was stopped by a guy who was being beaten by Leon's gang. He asked why Zeke decided to help him. Draker replied that he should worry about this issue, since he had helped himself more than he had helped the unknown cadet. Perhaps the guy was so affected by his new sword, which he took from Master Graham. This weapon is definitely supposed to protect the weak. A few minutes later, Zeke Draker arrived safely at Professor Fannin's research lab and unfolded Master Graham's blueprints before him. The man carefully examined all the notes and drawings and was extremely surprised by the blacksmith's abilities. He turned out to be a true genius. The man carefully examined all the notes and drawings and was extremely surprised by the blacksmith's abilities. He turned out to be a true genius. The core was the heart of the machine, but as it turned out, the design had extremely complex limitations. The professor explained that the core could be small, but it had to be incredibly powerful, and that a way to regulate the output force had to be devised. Fannin suggested making some minor adjustments to the drawing, but this work would take him about 10 years or maybe even 15. But there is another option, and you can resort to an alternative, but the item that is needed for this is a high-density mana stone. Zeke jumped in surprise. Isn't this an ancient artifact that cannot be created with modern technology? That is, an ancient rare relic. Professor Fannin became sad because finding other artifacts is much more difficult than obtaining the mana stone, which is necessary for the existing plans. Zeke also clearly became sad. They could kick him out of here if they found out that the guy doesn't know how to use aura, so he definitely can't wait 10 or 15 years. But he also can't get 3,000 gold coins to buy everything he needs, and in all likelihood, he will have to give up Graham's shining sword. Everyone thinks he's using aura because of what happened during the blessing ritual, but it was just the statue's reaction caused by the ether and healing. Ether is a force that is difficult for humans to control, and Zeke cannot use any sword skill that requires aura, except for the soul spirit skill. Professor Fanon continued to be amazed and admitted that the creator of this drawing was an amazingly intelligent person. Even considering the complex core, the design is quite effective, as something like this is very difficult to find even among Golden Age relics. And the professor's words suddenly gave Zeke an idea. He asked to take care of Graham's drawings, and he himself should leave for a while. Fanon did not understand the young man's actions, nor did he understand his explanation of why he was going anywhere at all. But Zeke Draker only smiled mysteriously and said that in the very near future he would obtain a mana stone of the highest density. At the beginning of the Golden Age, a long war of liberation raged, during which people tried to escape from the power of the dragons. This long-standing battle ended with the victory of Terracon, Draker over the evil dragon godmother, and so the people gained a century of peace. Then, the ancient relics that were discovered in the dragon's lair were remnants of the Hero King's era, and among them was a high-density stone capable of satisfying the mana needs of an entire village. Now, all the evidence from those times was in the central library of the Draker Academy, where Zeke went. The building was rarely used, but it was maintained because it was believed to have been founded by the cockroach Draker, and in recent times, countless relics from the Golden Age had been found there. The news spread across the continent, but that was in Zeke Draker's past life, and it would take another 10 years to reach that point. You could search for the entrance to the library's secret sector all day and still not find it because it was well camouflaged. All Zeke Draker needed now was to be very attentive, so the guy decided to activate the Dragon Vision skill. After walking through the various sections of the library, he found himself in a huge hall where the floor was covered with ancient, intricate ceramic tiles. He began tapping the slabs to detect the dull sound where the space was located under the tile. And of course, he found it. This task did not take the guy even 10 minutes. The disguised entrance to the mysterious section of the library was found. From now on, things will go faster. To move the heavy slab, he had to use the spirit's souls, because without magical support, the guy himself would not have been able to cope. Within minutes, Zeke Draker was carefully making his way into the most mysterious section of the Draker Academy library, a place that only a few dozen people had ever visited. But despite everything, all the ancient books were neatly arranged on the shelves, and absolute order reigned in the room. The information bulletin didn't say that the entrance to the secret library would be so deep. Zeke even had to light a torch. After walking a little further, the guy heard strange steps. He hid behind a column and began to watch carefully. It will be at least 10 years before people discover and excavate the ruins of this library. I wonder if anyone could have found this place before Draker. After standing for a while, the guy walked out into the middle of the corridor and froze in fear and surprise. Near the wall stood two skeletons, holding different tools in their hands. There were also shovels and pickaxes lying around among the skeletons, which meant that those who excavated the ruins had died here. If so, you need to activate the critical strike skill so that, if necessary, you can be ready to fight magical creatures. The guy swung his sword several times. Shovels, picks, and crowbars flew to the sides. Several skeletons fell to the floor with a terrible crash. It's strange because Zeke had imagined that these skeletons would immediately start living and attack him from all sides. But this did not happen, because in order to have more information, Zeke Draker called up a virtual tablet. It turned out that he received a few extra points for destroying two skeletons, which were apparently monsters. The guy thought that while hunting for the mana stone, he had completely forgotten that it was vital for him to earn more points. So, without thinking twice, the guy ran further down the corridor, looking for new skeletons and diligently breaking them into pieces. As a result, Zeke Draker managed to destroy as many as 20 skeletons. For each of them, he received 1 karma point. After this, the guy had the opportunity to activate new dragon skills, for which he had to pay 50 points. Next, Zeke Draker decided to activate the minimap function to better navigate the mysterious space. But for some reason, this map seemed magical to the guy, because it could independently transform from 2D to 3D. Zeke never expected that deep underground he would find such advanced technologies as a 3D map. It was simply amazing, and the guy was certainly very happy about it. Now he can see the exact location of the Mana Stone in this place. He then gave a request for the map to navigate to the location of the Mana Stone. This place turned out to be a storage room, so the guy began to plot the fastest route to the object of his search. Less than a minute passed before the virtual map gave the guy the result and showed him the shortest route to his destination. Zeke Draker didn't wander the corridors for long, and half an hour later he was standing in front of a huge door, behind which was a storage room. The guy understood perfectly well that such a door wouldn't just open, and there was no point in knocking either. He needed to figure out how to get inside. He remembered that he had previously read about a magical security spell that had the ability to open any door for a companion. The reason why the Magic Tower and the Archmage of Nirvana were attracted must have been precisely because of this door. And now the guy understood that if it weren't for his unique gloves, he could have lost his hand from contact with this magical door. After thinking a little more, he realized that he couldn't handle it on his own, and asked the system to open this door for him. He did it for fun, but it turned out that the system could hear him well and carry out all of Draker's orders. Then the guy asked the question that was tormenting him. He asked why the system forced him to regress, but he did not receive an answer to this question. He then asked the virtual tablet how the administration system worked, but there was no answer either. The young man realized that this thing would not answer any questions concerning his personal life and regression. So he asked his virtual tablet to just open this mysterious door so that he could get inside. Some locks clicked, the door opened, and the system reported that the dragon burial room, which is called the pantry, was open. Zeke Draker took a few steps inside and froze in surprise. There were tall shelves around, and on them were chests of different sizes. The guy approached one of them and easily lifted the lid. It turned out that the chest was filled to the brim with valuable relics and treasures. There was a countless amount of different goods here, but it would be good to find at least one ancient relic. That would be enough for Zeke. Then Zeke opened another chest and a satisfied smile appeared on the guy's face. It seemed he had come to the right place. The chest contained carefully arranged mana stones of the highest density, which was what Zeke was looking for. In half an hour, he filled a whole backpack with mana stones and other various relics. Was he really going to have to come back here until he graduated from the academy? But for some reason, the guy couldn't shake off some strange feeling, as if someone was spying on him, and the gloves on his hands turned red. Then some strange energy began to circle around Draker and lift heavy chests of gold into the air. The guy had to ask the system what this mysterious place was that he was in now. The system responded that Cadet Draker was currently in the very center of the Dragon Slayer's home. Previously, he had not read any information in information sources about a strange abandoned room that was completely filled with coffins, or what was going on here. Once again, I had to use the virtual minimap to more precisely determine my location and think about how to proceed. Zeke Draker knew it. He was really not far from where he had been before, but there was no direct passage to the house of the Dragon Slayers. If this is the case, then this may be a hidden area that no one has ever found before, and it can't just be left there. In front of him, the guy saw the enormous armor of an ancient knight. It seemed as if someone was taking very good care of it. The system informed Zeke that he had found exclusive Dragon Slayer equipment, but he needed to be very careful with it. Zeke began to examine everything in great detail. He thought that the armor must be different from that worn by the knights of the Golden Age. Then the guy turned the armor around to take a good look at the back. There was a strange hole near the neck, and of course Zeke stuck the mana stone in there. The system reported that Draker had installed a mana battery into the Dragon Slayer's exclusive gear, and it was about to activate. Then it became more and more interesting. An excited smile appeared on the guy's face. Now he was returning to the past. A few seconds later, Zeke saw the activation of the mana stone in action as the armor began to move. The guy didn't expect this turn of events at all. He was even a little scared. There was no one to help him here. He even fell to the ground out of fear. Actually, the system could have warned him about the consequences so that he could prepare. That is, the source of energy for this ancient armor was precisely a mana stone of very high density, which means Zeke has reached his goal. He was curious about what other properties the stones had, because they required an insanely huge source of energy. The guy walked around a few more rooms, but unfortunately, they were all empty. Only the last room remained, which he had not yet been in. There was a huge glass cube in the middle of the room, and Zeke decided to ask the system what function this object performed. What the system reported about this item put the guy in real shock. He couldn't even imagine that he would find such a treasure. The tablet sent a message that the Terracan legacy had been found. Draker, namely the heart of the cursed dragon godmother. Zeke couldn't believe it. To think that his great-grandfather left the heart of the slain dragon as a gift. That would explain the ominous feeling he felt when he entered the pantry. Well, now the guy had completely different sensations. The system told him that the heart of the dragon godmother was reacting to the administrator, and Zeke clearly felt it. He heard the dragon say that he would soon kill them all, but he did not yet understand the meaning of these words. Why was he the chosen one? Why did the universe decide that Zeke was the one who should find the heart of the dragon that his ancestor left here? He looked for some time at the glass cube in which the most mysterious object in this building was kept, and did not know what to do next. It still seemed to him that he was not alone in this room, and that someone was continuing to watch him closely. The system gave a hint. It was necessary to get rid of a strong curse that emanated from the heart of the Bagamut. For this there was a reward. But to do this, Zeke had to activate one of the skills, namely, Indomitable Mental Defense. But here's the problem. The tablet reported that at this stage this skill could not be activated. In my head, the dragon's strange and terrible words about killing them all were heard louder and louder. Zeke felt like his head was about to explode from the overabundance of sensations. He couldn't fully control his body and actions. His mental body was splitting into two parts, one of which belonged more to the dragon. The god monster could even talk to Zeke. But, by putting in all his efforts and activating all the skills possible, Draker managed to overcome the dragon's curse. The system reported that the administrator completed the unscheduled task and received ownership of the dragon heart as a reward. In addition, Zeke Draker gained the skill of infinite stamina and also activated the skill of healing factor so that his body could regenerate. But even after all this, the guy did not fully understand why his ancestor gave him the heart of the god dragon. It was just that now he felt like a dense source of mana was penetrating his body. But he did not have the ability to accept this mana. Zeke Draker clearly understood that without a place to store all these magical stones, the mana would simply destroy his body. It was necessary to make some decisions very quickly, so as not to remain here for several more centuries. Since no normal thoughts came to mind, Zeke decided to call on the spirit soul for help. He then realized that with the help of ether, he could hide mana and subsequently seal her in the etheric hole. While all this magic was boiling, the air in the room became extremely hot, and different energies mixed with each other. Then, out of nowhere, a terrible fiery whirlwind appeared and rose straight up to the ceiling, throwing the guy several meters away from the glass cube. Zeke Draker completely stopped understanding what was happening to him and around him. Real dark magic was happening here. When he opened his eyes, he realized that he was in a huge crater left in the ground by a fiery whirlwind. The boy slowly realized that he was still alive, and that he was holding the magical heart of the dragon in his hands. He approached the glass club again, examined it from all sides, and still could not understand how the heart ended up in his hands, and then ended up on his body. It looked like it was really the mother who was lying to the ancient dragon Bagamut. It is possible that the dragon heart imprint appeared on his body because he sealed the mana of the god. He turned to the system, and it gave out information that Zeke Draker absorbed the cursed dragon's heart. The absorbed mother transformed the administrator's body, and it was transformed into a divine body, and now Zeke has the right to open the protected library of Tarakan. Draker. So the entry-level quest book has been successfully unlocked by young cadet Zeke Draker. But the tablet informed me that the ancestor had one more gift left for the guy. To get it, he needed to follow the provided link. The guy stood there and didn't know what to do next. Of course, he was interested in what else his great-grandfather had prepared for him. When he opened the status bar, his eyes seemed to widen to the size of the earth. This simply couldn't be happening. The building of the Platinum Mansion of the Night Academy was drowning in moonlight, and it was deep night outside. Zeke Draker was finally able to get to his room, and, after locking himself inside, he was finally able to calm down a little and put everything back in its place. Power and physique were his reward, and it looks like the spell can be unlocked once he gets stronger. Power meant that the boy could now control the dragon's thoughts, and his physique was capable of functioning at the highest level. Then a window of state appeared again, connected not with the second dying gift, but with the ancestor Tarakan himself. To open Tarak's secure library on Draker, Zeke needed to update the information on his tablet and access the secure library folder. The system then suggested moving to a location where it was possible to update the information. For this, it offered to use a virtual map. The map paved the way to Valhalla, the most prestigious school for training knights on the entire continent. Zeke learned that outsiders except the administrator are prohibited from entering this territory, but now he has such an opportunity. If there is something there that is connected with the dying gift of his ancestor, then perhaps it is worth changing his plans a little. It looks like Zeke will have to continue being a part of this damn family, and now he needs to get the reward at the end of the mission. The system announced that training for a low-level administrator was beginning. It was somewhat similar to the Adventurers Guild missions or mercenary assignments. The guy found himself in a huge mirrored room. The floor was equipped with small blue monitors instead of tiles. Zeke Draker had no idea where he was, what this place was, or why the system had sent him here. It was very much like he was simply teleported from one reality to another, but it was interesting. Everything was different now. It felt like this place was different from what it was last time. Now the boy saw the approaching silhouettes of terrible monsters, who were holding in their hands terrible bats with iron tips. These were the orcs that Zeke Draker would need to defeat in a tutorial quest within a certain time limit. The boy thought that the educational system was trying to create situations in which he could use all the skills he had acquired. For a moment, Zeke thought it would be nice if he could enjoy these kinds of benefits in his past life. But now he needed to win the fight with the orcs. So the guy began to activate all the skills that came to his mind. This time, the sword did not fail its owner either, and within half an hour the entire squad of monsters was easily eliminated. The system informed the guy that his body was now capable of functioning at the highest level. The speed of the body and the speed of ether transmission inside had increased. A moment later, the teleport worked again, and the guy returned back to the academy. Now he found himself in the training hall. At first, he thought that maybe it was all just an illusion, but everything that happened seemed incredibly real. Zeke glanced at the tablet's status bar, which indicated that he had received additional time bonuses and 40 points. Then the guy realized that he could easily buy any items and skills simply by using the system. The rarest relics could be purchased here, but they cost a fortune to buy, according to Zeke. The guy came up with a working scheme. He can sell some relics or put them up for auction to earn some extra money. No one else would probably think of something like this, so Draker could have made a fortune. Zeke was very tired. He had a terribly difficult day, so the guy decided to go back to his room and rest a little. This time, the guy really managed to get a good night's sleep. He was awakened by the rays of the sun streaming through the window into the room. Having quickly gotten ready, the guy headed towards Professor Fannin, who was already waiting for his strange student. The professor was interested in only one question: how the boy managed to take the most durable mana from the mysterious library. Every time high-density mana stones are found on the continent, they are registered using various ancient texts, and a title is issued for them. Thus, by checking the registration number, you can find out where and when the mana stone was found and its current owner. But the strange thing about the situation was that the stone that was in Fannin's hands was not registered anywhere. But Zeke didn't care at all. He didn't care whether it was done legally or not. He got this relic. He needed to act. So the professor and his young student hurried to Master Graham's house. They had good news for the man. A true miracle has happened. Thanks to this mana stone, the master will be able to resume his work and will develop new swords. The power and energy of these stones will help construct the perfect brazier for tempering the new swords that Graham will create in the future. Two young men knocked on the master's door. Zeke wanted to quickly see the expression on Graham's face when he saw what they had come with. The master appeared at the threshold and immediately smiled at the guests, and they, without delay, handed him a small, beautiful box. Graham immediately understood what the professor and his student had come with, and he didn't pay much attention to the box. But Zeke asked the man to open the gift, which he did immediately, and then almost fainted with happiness. Only after a few minutes, having come to his senses a little, Master Graham decided to ask where his friends got the highest quality mana stone. Zeke explained that this was the second dying gift of the cockroach Draker. It turned out that his great-grandfather was a terrible collector down to the marrow of his bones. Master Graham bowed low to his guests and began to thank them, assuring them that he would now exceed all of Zeke Draker's expectations. He promised that in a very short time he would create a blade for Zeke Draker, and he would do it at any cost, even at the cost of his own life. Now the man was more motivated than ever before, and his head was already full of ideas for making new models. And Graham also thanked Zeke Draker 10 times over for bringing him back to normal life and making him believe in himself again. Just a few days ago, the man was drinking bottle after bottle and living without any purpose, but now everything has changed dramatically. After saying goodbye to Master Graham, Zeke Draker left the forge and decided to take a little walk in the fresh air. He was curious about what the first sword from the new brazier would be like. And the master, having just seen the guests out of the house, immediately set to work. He wanted to surprise the young knight with his creations as soon as possible. More than anything in the world, Zeke Draker was glad to be back in his cozy room. He spent a lot of time, energy, and effort to create the perfect sword, but he hoped that the result would be worth it. It had been 3 weeks since that strange moment when he had fought Duke Draker and then received a note from him. And just as the boy remembered about this terrible man, the window sash swung open, and the gardener himself appeared in Zeke's room. It seemed to Draker that the Black Knight was now in a very bad mood. His eyes were burning with real malice. The man asked why the guy didn't come to him in the greenhouse, but he calmly replied that he simply didn't want to see the man. But it seems Duke was very determined. He approached Zeke and demanded that the guy reveal the whole truth about his abilities. A second later, he pushed the guy with such force that Zeke instantly fell out of the window of his room, which was located very high up. Zeke Draker saw his entire life flash before his eyes, but he caught himself in time and activated his ability of extreme agility and strength. He had no plans to die now, so the guy deftly grabbed the railing of the lower balcony, and then with one easy jump found himself back in his room. It seemed that the gardener was not even surprised by such a trick. He asked the guy again if he had any desire to organize a repeat fight. Duke was even a little offended, considering the guy's actions as ordinary mockery, while he was asking nicely for now. So now the man gave the guy only 5 seconds to think. Then Zeke had to give an answer, and it would be better if it was positive. But Draker replied within 3 seconds that he would not fight again with a man who did not even bother to explain who he really was. At the end, the guy added that he would never in his life believe the fairy tale that this man was an ordinary gardener at the Night Academy. It seems that Zeke was not very polite, because after his words, the gardener dealt him another crushing blow. Now the poor guy found himself in the corner of his room, having smashed a bunch of expensive furniture when he fell and rammed his head into the wall. A moment later, the gardener appeared next to him and extended his hand to the boy, saying that his name was Duke Draker, and he really used to be a Black Knight. He even felt a little ashamed, so he offered his sincere apologies for disrespecting a family member, a noble Black Knight. Duke's face distorted in genuine bewilderment. It began to dawn on him that the boy had long guessed who the man really was. Duke even felt uneasy and decided to go out onto the balcony to get some air. This boy reads him like an open book. Zeke shouted at the man not to leave. He still had a lot to explain, for example, why he was no longer a Black Knight. But Duke Draker abruptly refused to explain and said that their conversation was finally over. But the young knight wasn't finished yet, since Duke Draker had told the truth about himself. Now was the time for Zeke to lay all his cards on the table. The guy suddenly caught up with the man and sat down next to him, then said that he had a plan to become a student of the Wild Draker. The man didn't seem surprised at all, on the contrary. He agreed to become Zeke Draker's mentor. Then Zeke knelt down and announced his intention to become the Great Black Knight's apprentice, because with his help, the boy would gain the necessary wisdom and strength. The man was surprised by the fact that this young man even knew the student's oath by heart, since it is very rarely used nowadays. A long conversation followed. Zeke was interested in absolutely everything about this man, especially why Duke agreed to become his teacher. After all, the Black Knight was known for not accepting absolutely anyone. His only student up until that time was Andre. Perhaps during their final duel, Duke Draker saw potential in Zeke that surpassed that of Knight Andrew. But Duke Draker decided not to comment on his decision in any way, but invited the guy to guess for himself why he became the Black Knight's apprentice. Zeke suggested that he was the best of the best, but the knight stopped him, saying that if he was so arrogant, then he would also take Reina Tarun as his student. Then, Duke finally said that he really liked the guy's persistence, because to reach the level of a red or black knight, talent alone is not enough. Since talented people have never encountered problems, they quickly give up in the face of really serious problems. Duke was right. The most famous geniuses, who were predicted to be red knights, not only do not achieve this title, but also remain blue knights until the end of their lives. Suddenly, the Black Knight said that they needed to stop chatting immediately, because it was high time to start the first lesson. Thus, the teacher and his only student found themselves in the training hall of the Western Greenhouse, and it was really necessary to move from talk to action. It seemed like Duke had some kind of terrible plan in mind, because he ordered the guy to run in circles almost as soon as they entered the room. If the teacher wanted to test Zeke's endurance, he wouldn't have much luck, since the boy had 100% command of this ability. But it turned out that the teacher stopped Zeke only to give him a practice blow, but the boy deftly dodged it. The next second, Draker decided to attack the Black Knight first, but he didn't expect him to fight back so furiously. Then the teacher stopped abruptly and said that the boy had some problems checking his pulse. He had realized this back in the hospital ward when he visited Zeke. Then they fought in the greenhouse, and now the master made Zeke run 500 laps. But even after that, he did not feel a drop of the young knight's aura. Now young Draker won't let the teacher check his pulse, so the teacher concludes that the boy doesn't know how to use his aura. The men began training, and during training the Black Knight reported that he had seen that bronze statue. Then there was a lot of buzz about the previously unseen golden glow, and everyone was interested in seeing this phenomenon. That's why the Black Knight is now incredibly curious as to why Zeke Draker won't let him check his pulse, which means he's hiding something. The man realized that the guy didn't suspect him. Draker was unable to control the aura, and this situation was out of the ordinary. Zeke thought that he was very lucky that Duke himself was standing in front of him now, because no one else would have any suspicions about his aura. There is no need to lie any further. unlike in his past life where he was the first awakened loser in the family. He has the ability to reflect mana, and this fact proves that Zeke Draker is a pureblood, but he cannot actually use aura. And this truth must hide him in the most secret lie, and now he asks forgiveness for not telling about it earlier. Zeke almost burst into tears. If everyone found out that Draker couldn't use aura, they would simply throw him out of the academy. The guy was very cunning in his plan, so he was confident that such a performance for Duke would work like a charm. The Black Knight became a little sad and thoughtful. He let go of the young man's hand, but apparently had no intention of saying anything. The man carefully examined the guy from head to toe again. Well, he didn't feel any aura at all, despite the fact that Zeke had successfully awakened. Even after checking Zeke Draker's pulse several times, he still can't be sure that the blessing ceremony was performed correctly. Language thought that even if it was true that he could not awaken with an aura, he would have to find the reason for this without helpers. He will deny everything for now, and then we will see. First, you need to build the right relationship with this person. He was often called fickle by those who weren't familiar with the concept of classes, and that was to be expected. Zeke decided to ask the Black Knight how he understood the term fickle, and he replied that it was simply a person with abnormal abilities. For example, there are people who are able to activate both aura and mana at the same time, or look into the future, but there are very few of them. To be honest, most people don't take kindly to anomalous abilities, so the Black Knight advised the guy to keep quiet about his uniqueness. But Zeke said the reason the master considers him fickle is because of his insane stamina and ability to recover. Whatever the damage, internal wounds take longer to heal, but the guy recovers almost instantly, but it takes a lot of energy. Zeke came up with a theory that since his energy was constantly being used up by stamina and healing, there was little left over to perceive the aura. It sounded plausible, which is why the guy can't use aura and won't be able to live up to the Black Knight's expectations. But the man just smiled and asked the guy not to think about it. He uses the art of the storm, it is special, and does not involve the use of aura. In essence, special art was a special technique created by Duke Draker himself, who achieved great heights. This skill is usually used to kill dragons, so it would be more correct to use aura. But his storm art uses the guy's trained body. He decided to demonstrate everything in action and asked Zeke to watch him closely, which the guy did with pleasure. When Duke Draker went into action, Zeke was so amazed that he couldn't even speak. It was a breathtaking sight. It seemed that the man was moving so quickly that he could be seen in several parts of the hall at once. Zeke only had time to follow the movement. The Black Knight stopped, looked at the guy, and asked if he understood everything about his technique. Zeke nodded his head affirmatively and asked permission to repeat the master's trick, to which the man also nodded his head in agreement. Zeke jumped so hard that his footprints were left in the concrete floor, indicating his endless strength. Now it was Duke Draker's turn to watch his students' lightning-fast movements, and he did a superb job. Now, repeating the precise movements of his teacher, the boy could see what he had simply not noticed before, and this made him very happy. Apparently, some of the knight's steps were taken as if he were fighting someone, others were for attack, and others were to dodge a blow. Behind every step the Black Knight took there was a clear, definite goal, and it was all now so obvious to Zeke that he almost went crazy with joy. The Black Knight was pleased with the young man's success, but he still understood that there was still a big difference between his actions and the boy's. The boy was also pleased with himself, so he asked the teacher if he was skilled enough to gain the confidence of a black rank. This behavior of this arrogant boy terribly infuriated the Black Knight. Zeke definitely needed to be a little more modest. The next morning, all the cadets of the Night Corps gathered in the Academy's dining hall. This morning did not bode well for Zeke. It had already been a month since Duke had started actively training the boy, so Zeke was eating extra food and trying to get good rest to restore his strength. During breakfast, the teacher Andre suddenly approached the boy and asked him to give him a few minutes of his attention. Andre's question didn't take the young man by surprise. He expected him to ask how Zeke had managed to persuade the gardener to work with him. Young Draker smiled cheekily. The rumor that he was studying with Duke Draker spread throughout the academy and even reached Andre. Putting an innocent smile on his face, Zeke replied that he hadn't done anything special and that Mr. Dexter had chosen him himself. Andre stared at the guy for a while longer and then casually said that perhaps his purebred status had played a role after all. Without thinking twice, Zeke decided to hit the man where it hurt and said that Andre had a real inferiority complex, and it was very noticeable. Even if Duke was initially interested in him because of his pedigree, does Andre really think that Sir Dexter is the kind of person who chooses his students for such a simple reason? The fact that Zeke Draker managed to intrigue him and use this intrigue to become his student is certainly not a testament to his abilities. It is something else entirely. He gave Andre advice that instead of wasting time trying to get chosen out of an inferiority complex, it might be better to put in at least a little effort. After breakfast, the boy went to train in the Western Greenhouse Arena, where the famous Black Knight was already waiting for him. Entering the arena, the guy realized that the Black Knight was not alone here. There was another person who was actively running in circles, and it was Andre. The teacher and student looked at the man in bewilderment and did not understand at all why he was exhausting himself by running. And Andre was indeed already winding, probably, his 1000th circle, and did not even pay attention to the two spectators who were watching him closely. Duke reported that Andre came to him and begged him to take him as an apprentice. If not, he wouldn't even mind being a servant, just to be near the Black Knight. And then Mr. Duke joked that he would definitely take him if he could run 2,000 laps without an aura, and now they see the result. To be honest, at first Zeke thought that Andre was just a smug idiot, but in reality it turned out that this man had a character of steel. The guy noticed the trash can that stood in the corner of the room. It turned out that Andre had already changed his second set of clothes while running. The next morning, all the cadets were gathered in the courtyard of the Knightly Academy. Its owner was supposed to arrive at the educational institution. The young men didn't particularly want to meet the head of the Knights Guild, but there was nothing else to do. This was the law of this educational institution. After a while, the manager shouted for everyone to show off and greet the arriving head of the academy. Howard Draker, the head of the Knightly Academy, slowly stepped out of the carriage. The man carefully looked at all the cadets and smiled contentedly. Well, as it turned out a few minutes later, everyone had gathered here not for the sake of the head of the academy, because another carriage had arrived, a very expensive and luxurious one. A middle-aged man appeared, and as it turned out, he was the founder of this academy, before whom Howard Draker bowed his head low. The leader did not dare to raise his eyes. He loudly spoke words of greeting to the man and ordered all the cadets to bow as well. It was at that moment that the clock struck exactly noon, and Zeke, standing with the others in the square, thought it was very symbolic. For some reason, a fragment from his past life surfaced in his memory, and he especially clearly saw a hand approaching his neck to kill. The founder of the academy patted Howard on the shoulder and said that the man had done a great job. Howard replied that it was nothing compared to what the founder had been doing. He was the only one who truly understood this. The head of the third Transcendental Dragon Slayer family, Arthur Draker. Howard bowed low again and said that it was very hot outside today and that they should go to the hall of the academy building. But Arthur stopped him. He climbed a high hill and decided to give a welcoming speech to all the young cadets. The man asked the students of the Knight Academy to train long and hard, because their development would determine the longevity of their existence and the slaying of dragons. All the young people looked at this man with admiration, even forgetting to breathe and blink. They idolized Arthur. All the boys shouted in unison that they were glad to welcome their founder and would train hard to bring glory to the name of Draker. Only after this did the founder turn his attention back to Howard and say that he was now ready to walk through the academy's auditoriums. After some time, Arthur ordered the young cadet Zeke Draker to be called to his office, and the boy appeared promptly, greeting the founder once again. The man smiled and asked Zeke to make himself at home in his office. He simply invited the cadet in for a conversation. Arthur placed a cup of tea and his favorite sweets in front of the guy, and Zeke realized that they were even reporting to him about the food that the guy liked. There were once rumors that even the Emperor had never seen some of life's joys, but there was probably nothing the Drakers had never seen in their lives. Now the guy didn't think it was just a rumor, and Arthur said that he called him because he found out that Duke had taken on an apprentice. The guy nodded and mentally noted that Arthur didn't beat around the bush but asked directly, which did him a great favor. Zeke Draker said that he is actually learning from Duke in order to become the strongest man on the continent in the future. Arthur looked at the guy carefully, but it was impossible to tell from his gaze what this strange and powerful man was thinking about. Zeke decided to continue his thought. He needed strength in order to feel absolutely free in this world. In principle, the guy wasn't lying at all. It was the pure truth. He wants such a life for himself and will try to do everything to achieve it. The air around Arthur Draker began to fill with a blue aura. He said that in this case, Zeke Draker would surpass even himself. Zeke realized that it was the astral sword, as it granted power over all living things within its radius, making it the pinnacle of aura use, available only to Black Knights. The guy didn't think he would find himself in such a strange and absurd situation. At that moment, he really felt weak and vulnerable. One thing Zeke Draker knew for sure, he would not play the goody-two-shoes and humiliate himself in front of this terrible man. He was not one to be timid either. He just needs to pull himself together and endure this conversation, prove himself, and let Arthur know that he is on the right path. Arthur stood up from the table and, despite Zeke's comment, said that this was the most interesting thing he had heard in years. The man then went on to say that he had come here to support the academy, and Zeke in particular, but that this would still not be enough. The boy briefly thought that he thought Duke was the strongest man on the continent, but it turned out that compared to Arthur, the Black Knight was inferior. Then Arthur put a beautiful box with an engraving of the golden dragon on the table and said that it was a gift to the guy for becoming Duke's student. Zeke's eyes widened in surprise when he opened the box. There was a black card inside, and the guy knew perfectly well what it meant. It was a unique credit card that was issued very rarely and only to select people. I never even thought that I would ever see it. Just by having it on hand, its owner can gain incredible advantages anywhere on the continent. But it doesn't end there. Arthur said with a smile that the black card was in their names, so Zeke Draker could freely use it at any time and for any needs. The guy politely thanked the man for such an expensive gift and said that he would use the black card only when absolutely necessary. But in reality, Zeke understood perfectly well that after using a credit card, a record remains in the system. If I give such a gift, Arthur just wants to keep track of what the guy does. Arthur knew it was better to let it be so than for the boy to resort to the help of the Black Combat Squad. And now, in Zeke's opinion, the man did not pose a threat to him. When the guy left the founder Arthur's office, the man leaned back in his chair and exhaled loudly. The conversation turned out to be quite difficult. Behind him, he heard quiet footsteps, and then he saw the Black Knight himself, who told Arthur that he was disgusting. Duke said that Arthur suddenly started playing daddy, even though he had been neglecting his child all this time. But founder Arthur reminded the man that he, as the head of the family, had no other choice, so Duke's words were slander. Without waiting for a special invitation, the Black Knight unceremoniously plopped down on the sofa in front of Arthur and asked him to take him away from here immediately. Well, Arthur suggested another option. He took out a small bottle from his cloak, which also had an engraving of the golden dragon, and offered Duke a drink. The drink was called the Breath of the Fire Dragon, and the liquid in the bottle was truly magnificent. Duke had no doubt about it. Arthur reminded the man that the atmosphere on the continent had been quite strange lately, which was why he had been locked up in the academy. But Duke pretended he had no idea what the man was talking about. He said he was just a gardener here and so didn't know all the gossip. It turned out that the emperor had gone mad with the strange idea of immortality and was now telling his theory to people across the continent. The Black Knight shook his head in disagreement, as magic could only rejuvenate, but would never grant true immortality. But there is one but. That if the relic which has been sought for so long turns out to be directly connected to the ancient dragon. There was a heavy moment of silence. The Black Knight did not answer, and he had many reasons for this. The language was behind the wall of Arthur's office, but using his listening skills, the guy knew what the two were talking about. They were talking about eternal youth, which the Emperor so desperately wants to achieve but cannot do so because it can only be achieved through magic. Arthur suggested that perhaps eternal youth could be achieved using the relics of an ancient dragon. This is also possible. Duke looked nervously at his interlocutor and suggested that he could somehow find out where exactly the relic was. Judging by the report of the Black Scene, it should be located on the territory of the northern continent. That's exactly what Duke thought. But before the Empire, fortunately, the information has not yet arrived. But it is only a matter of time. The Emperor may soon find out about everything. Looking back, who was this crazy emperor who started a war as soon as he ascended the throne, supposedly with the goal of uniting the continent? It seemed to Duke that the head of their empire had become a little smarter in recent years and had already abandoned this ridiculous dream. But apparently the man was deeply mistaken. Arthur replied that if things continued like this and the emperor did not stop, their continent could find itself in the flames of war again, and no one wanted that. Arthur wanted to go north himself to find the relic, but he knew that if he left his position, the emperor would begin to act especially recklessly. That's why the founder of the academy came here and decided to talk to the Black Prince. Together they could solve this problem, or at least dull its activity. The academy's gardener didn't say anything. He just knew that Arthur was a cunning man. So he simply raised his glass of drink and nodded. So the two men who found themselves in this strange situation decided to act together and at least slightly curb the emperor's zeal for eternal youth. Zeke continued eavesdropping, and the men said they were much stronger together and could rely on each other at any moment. The young man used the eavesdropping artifact for too long and then sank to the floor, exhausted. After absorbing the mantis's heart, his body couldn't escape the kidneys. Now Zeke had no doubt that the statuette he had managed to obtain before he regressed was a relic of an ancient dragon. The voice that kept playing in his head right before his death and the system message he saw after the regression all fell into place. Now he understood what a valuable thing he had received, because he had stolen the most ancient relic on the continent, capable of fulfilling the Emperor's greatest wish. So he mobilized the hunting dogs, who were the Imperial Court's elite assassination force, to capture and eliminate them. At that moment, Zeke was barely aware of it because he was completely consumed by revenge, and he didn't care at all what exactly the statuette was that he grabbed from the cave. Finally, he has now found the key to the main mystery. The administrator system that sent him to the past is a function of the ancient dragon's relic. But the guy couldn't stop thinking about who, and most importantly why, created something like this, and why he was drawn into this story. Behind the wall, Arthur Draker said goodbye to Duke, and the gardener promised that he would immediately begin to carry out the tasks the founder had given him. Closing the door behind his guest, Arthur Draker exhaled loudly. He would finally be able to be alone with his thoughts for a little while. But the man had too many thoughts, and the future of the entire continent would depend on how he built a strategy to fight the Emperor. At this time, Zeke was thinking that if this was really the relic that the Emperor was looking for, then how was returning to the past connected with eternal youth and immortality? The guy heard footsteps behind the wall, and the next moment the door swung open, and Arthur appeared on the threshold, having heard that there was someone under the door. Zeke Draker's morning began, as always, with training in the gym. Today, he decided to practice with a sword. After some time, Assistant Decker entered the hall and reported that a classmate had come to see Zeke, and the guy ordered that the visitor be led into the hall. The guy couldn't even guess who it could be. But a second later, Liam Stone, Jacob Wardeck's faithful servant, ran into the hall. Without saying a word or even saying hello, the guy immediately fell to his knees in front of Zeke Draker and began asking to talk. Zeke Draker was terribly surprised by such a visit, and even more by the behavior of this guy, but still decided to listen to him and find out what the problem was. As it turns out, just a few minutes later, Liam Stone wants to become Zeke's loyal friend. But if he doesn't accept him, he's even ready to be Draker's subordinate and give the guy his all. The guy shouted that he didn't want to have anything to do with Jacob Wardeck anymore, because he turned out to be a real scoundrel. He simply took and threw out his assistant and servant. They don't even treat animals like that. And they threw him out like an unwanted kitten. The guy also said that he really wants to enter the Valhalla Academy. The tongue remembered that this had already happened in a past life. This guy was also obsessed with the academy. But Draker replied that in that case Liam should have gone to Reyna Tarun's family, or at least to the Simmons, but not to him. Draker tried to explain to the boy that he had no support from his family, that he lived on his own and acted as he decided. Therefore, to his great regret, despite all his desire, he cannot help Liam Stone get into the Valhalla Academy. And there's another very sensitive question. How can Zeke trust Liam after what happened between them in the recent past? He could easily be spying on Zeke Draker on orders from Jacob Wardeck, and Zeke wouldn't even know about it. Well, something incredible happened then. Liam Stone took his dagger out of its sheath and raised it high above his head. He then said that he would cut out his tongue so that Zeke would be sure that Leon would not pass on the information to anyone. He simply would not be able to do this. And to prevent the guy from escaping from Zeke Draker, he can cut off one of his legs, so he won't even be able to walk normally, let alone run away. For Zeke Draker, this was too much. He realized that the guy was in such a state that he couldn't joke at all. He was saying everything in all seriousness. His eyes were shining with hope that Zeke would accept him, and at the same time there was too much hatred in them for Jacob Wardeck. Zeke Draker remembered that in his past life, and in this one too, he desperately wants to become stronger than everyone else. And this guy probably has the same dream. Perhaps he will become a good assistant to Zeke, because he cannot say that Liam is weak or cowardly. Out of sheer desperation, Liam Stone plunged his dagger straight into the concrete floor, and he did it with such force that the knife went in almost to the hilt. This action slightly shocked and frightened Zeke Draker. It turned out that this guy can be insanely desperate, and this is not always a good thing in military affairs. He looked at Liam and said that if he could withstand even one movement during the attack, Zeke would be happy to accept him into his service. Liam slowly rose to his feet, looked Zeke straight in the eye and said just one word. "Thank you," but for Draker that was enough. To be honest, Liam Stone thought that it would be quite easy to withstand just one move from Zeke Draker. He has been training for a long time, so there will be no problems. Besides, Liam also knows how to use his aura, and even quite well, and he is the same age as Zeke Draker, so they are almost equal. It was even difficult for him to breathe, because the guy understood the seriousness of the situation and knew very well how well Zeke Draker fought. Moreover, it was necessary to take into account the fact that for the last 3 months his opponent had been training very actively with the Black Knight Duke. The fight was truly tough and dangerous. Each of the opponents understood what they were fighting for and were aware of the consequences. Zeke said he was really hoping that Liam Stone would be a more experienced and serious opponent, but he turned out to be a wimp. Liam Stone fell to the ground from the blow, but the guy had no intention of giving up. His determination was worthy of respect. Apparently, Jacob really did abandon this guy. If Liam hadn't been his servant, such a distant relative wouldn't have even been able to enter the cradle. Even Zeke himself, a direct descendant, was expelled from the academy, so it wouldn't be surprising if Liam is expelled now too. He has plenty of reasons to worry. Well, is it really worth it to suffer like this because in his past life Liam was expelled from the academy and his knightly order fell apart? But the guy reached the Crimson World and he was called the King of Mercenaries. Zeke Draker was about to leave the room, but some force stopped the guy, and he looked back again to look at Liam. He looked at the cadet with pleading eyes and asked to give him another chance. And for some reason, Zeke felt sorry for this guy. He paused and was silent for a moment, then told Liam Stone that he would give him one last chance, but only on one condition. He reminded Liam that if you want to keep quiet, you cut out your tongue, and if you want to limp, you break your leg. The next moment, the guy suggested that the poor guy cut off his right hand, so he would prove that he would forever remain loyal to Zeke Draker. Liam Stone's eyes lit up with a strange fire. Zeke couldn't understand what this guy was feeling at the moment and how he would react to his words. After all, losing an arm meant never being a swordsman again, and no one in their right mind would agree to such a step. After a short silence, Liam Stone quietly whispered that he still needed to train a lot, and to do this he needed to have two hands. Zeke remained silent, and Liam turned and headed for the exit. Draker shouted at him not to be upset. If he didn't get to Valhalla, he would be able to reach the Crimson Knight. But then Draker's tongue noticed that the guy turned around. He went to his sword, which was pointed at the floor, and pulled it out. Just a split second passed and Zeke realized that now this crazy madman was going to cut off his own hand. He had already swung the ball. But, fortunately, he reacted very quickly. He ran up to the guy and tried to knock the weapon out of Liam Stone's hands with his sword. Stone's sword flew off to the side again, because Zeke still managed to prevent something irreparable, and he would never have forgiven himself for this act. Liam Stone stood there for a few seconds in bewilderment. He didn't quite understand why Zeke Draker did this, because a minute ago he asked to cut off his hand. Then Zeke Draker jumped up to the guy and angrily asked why he had no brains at all. You can't follow stupid orders, even if they are given by a person higher and of higher status than you. But the guy quietly replied that his arm wasn't important to him at all, because if he didn't stay with Zeke, he could lose much more, and something more important than just one limb. Zeke exhaled and warned the guy that if he did anything like that again, he would throw Liam out the door, regardless of whether he was loyal to him or not. Draker finally took Liam Stone as his subordinate, and an hour later the guys were sitting in the cafeteria and planning their future life at the academy. Liam Stone has already thanked Zeke Draker 1,000 times for not refusing him and accepting him as his subordinate. Now his life will truly begin in a new way. But Zeke Draker wanted to know the real reason why the boy came to him when Jacob Wardick dumped him. Liam looked a little sad, and it was clear that he was having a hard time keeping up the conversation. But there was nothing he could do. He had to tell the whole truth. As it turns out, the guy has a mother whom he loves madly and tries to take care of the woman, but now she is ill with a terrible illness. A couple of days after Jacob Wardick kicked Liam out, the boy received a letter saying that his mother had become much worse and was in a dying condition. Now he doesn't have the means to give his mother proper treatment, and the village doctors can't even determine what kind of illness it is. That's why the guy decided to join the Valhalla Academy, because students and their families are better equipped with medical knowledge on the continent. The boy also said that his mother's body was covered in strange red spots in the shape of roses, and Zeke listened attentively and wrote something down on paper. He instantly remembered his past life, and words about a terrible disease flashed through his head. Its symptoms were periodic fever and spots all over the body. It finally dawned on him that these were symptoms of the red bloom, a terrible disease that would sweep across the central continent in 5 years. This will be a very scary period. People will become infected at a terrifying rate. The disease will spread very quickly and take the lives of many people. All this will continue until scientists develop sensational drugs that will stop the terrible epidemic. Zeke Draker handed the piece of paper to Liam and said it was a recipe for medicine for his mother. It was easy to make, so even a village doctor could handle it. He knew how to treat this disease. In the future, the brilliant alchemist brothers Al and Jeff would develop medicines to save the central continent from the epidemic. But the money-hungry Alchemists Guild exploited desperate people to make exorbitant profits from their work. Well, when the brothers found out about this, they immediately made the recipe public and distributed it among the population. That is why Zeke, from his past life, knew how to cure this disease. He told Liam that now he had a cure for his mother, and there was no longer any need to go to Valhalla or continue being Draker's subordinate. Liam Stone was incredibly grateful to his new friend for the prescription. Tears even appeared in his eyes and his voice trembled a little. But he stood up from the table and said that he could not take back what he had said earlier. He had already dedicated his life to serving Zeke. Then the boy stood up from the table and dropped to one knee in front of Draker. He swore to serve the knight faithfully and truly for the rest of his days. Draker thought that it would be nice to have a man under his command who would one day become the king of mercenaries. The guy no longer doubted Liam Stone's reliability. At this time, the head of the academy, Howard Draker, ordered the young administrator, Oven, to be brought to his office, and the boy immediately appeared before his superiors. Ares had a proposal for Howard Draker, as a man, to increase the difficulty of assignments for cadets this semester. The head of the academy was surprised by such a strange proposal, so he asked the logical question of why it was necessary to increase the difficulty. Ares bowed again, asked forgiveness for his insolence, but explained that the current first-year students were very capable guys, members of influential families and even pure-blooded awakened ones. If this year's nightly skills exam is as easy as last time, then young people will not have the opportunity to prove themselves. Owen Siemens bowed once more, and the head of the academy thought about the boy's words. If that was really the case, then the task for the first-year students should be made more difficult. As the young cadet left the chief's office, Howard Draker was deep in thought. It seemed strange to him that the cadet wanted to make life difficult for his fellow students. The man was a seasoned warrior and had seen a lot in his life. Now he understood for sure that blood does not lie, and these were not empty words. At this time, two young guys, Zeke Draker and Liam Stone, were in the training hall of the academy. Draker's subordinate decided not to waste a minute and start training. Zeke was pleased with the boy's desire to reach a higher level of skill, but he knew that in the future, Liam Stone would already exceed all expectations and become a great warrior. It was a unique test at Draker Academy, where students were paired up to complete challenging dungeons within a certain amount of time, and the cadets had to be paired up. Of course, Zeke Draker took his subordinate Liam Stone as his traveling companion, and he was very happy to show himself and his abilities for the first time. Zeke asked his partner to behave calmly and naturally, since too much excitement leads to mistakes, and too much calmness will lead to arrogance. The cadets had already gathered in the academy courtyard, split into pairs. Reyna Turun, who was the first to notice the pair of Draker and Stone, was also standing there. The master of ceremonies announced that Zeke Draker and Liam Stone would be next to enter the dungeon cave, and the boys fearlessly entered. But once inside, the boys met with the second manager, who informed them that another path had been prepared for them. This was quite suspicious because all the other couples headed in a completely different direction, and the manager stood and looked at them mysteriously. But there was nothing to be done. There was no turning back. So the boys nodded and obediently headed in the direction indicated by the manager. Each dungeon varied in difficulty, but there was no danger. The main task was to reach the designated point within the allotted time. Everyone was given 96 hours during which the cadets' combat skills would be assessed. If they brought monster heads with them, they could receive bonus points. But the most important condition of this task was to get out of the cave on time. If you don't, you'll fail the exam. After walking a fair distance, Liam and Zeke decided to take a short break and prepare some food for themselves. It was important to maintain their physical condition. Then they decided to take turns getting some sleep, and Zeke suggested keeping watch near the fire first while Stone got some rest. 16 hours have passed since he entered the dungeon. Before the exam, he did not sleep and trained for 3 days, which means he has been awake for more than 90 hours. The boy gradually came to the realization that the skill of infinite endurance only saves from physical fatigue, but not from mental fatigue. In the dungeon, you never know what will happen next, so it was important for Zeke to minimize the risks. Sitting by the fire, the boy didn't notice how he himself fell asleep. He dreamed of winter, an ancient temple, and a bell that signaled the approach of trouble. Then he saw a bright red flag with an image of the golden dragon on it. The flag was visible from afar. It was approaching. And then there was this strange girl with long curly hair. She was ringing the bell, warning everyone about the approaching danger. Zeke Draker woke up with a start. He had been dreaming of images from his past life. Now they had surfaced to tell him something important. This was not the first time the guy had this dream. Some higher powers were trying to convey important information to him, but so far he could not understand what exactly it was. Stop. It wasn't a bell from a dream. He clearly heard a bell, and it was ringing somewhere very close in the cave. This is all happening in reality. To avoid revealing his presence, the boy quickly opened the flask and poured the water from it directly into the fire. Darkness fell. The next thing he did was try to wake up Liam Stone as quietly as possible and tell the guy that someone was watching them closely and that he needed to look around carefully. It turned out that it was a creature that smelled of sulfur and hunted in packs. It was the third most dangerous monster and was called the Hellhound. In her past life, Reyna Tarun had already brought back the heads of monsters, but Zeke never imagined that he would have to face hellhounds. The guys hid around the corner and began to listen. Zeke understood that these creatures were very large, judging by the noise and the stamping of their feet. But neither Zeke nor Liam could even imagine that these orcs were not simple hounds. They were real huge mutants. The boys did not expect such a turn of events, and none of them had the slightest idea how to proceed. I had to react on the fly and no longer think about how to kill these creatures, but how to save my own lives. So both cadets grabbed their swords and agreed to fight to the end, supporting each other during the fight. After the battle with these monsters, Zeke realized one thing. It was all the work of Oven Zimmons. He decided to set a trap for them. But be that as it may, the guys defeated the hyenas, and then the troll, and received 30 karma points for it. And that was a nice bonus. Zeke decided to use the virtual tablet to understand how they should proceed and get out of the cave in time. The tablet gave a task. You had to defeat 100 monsters in 72 hours. The reward was double the amount of karma points. But 100 monsters turned out to be a big problem. Even if the dungeon is huge, usually in one area there are a maximum of 3 to 4 types of monsters. If you search hard enough, you can find 10 types of these monsters, but completing such a task will be quite difficult. While Zeke was thinking, Liam Stone had already quickly collected all his things and was ready to search for monsters. The guy had a huge duffel bag for their heads. Both cadets decided that they needed to immediately set out to search for the monsters. Although there was plenty of time, they did not know what awaited them ahead. After walking several kilometers, they saw a new herd of fire hyenas moving towards them. They needed to get ready and accept the fight. The guys dealt with this herd of monsters in a few minutes. The fight did not cause any difficulties, and Stone was already packing the heads in a bag. But a minute later, a bat of terrifying size flew up to the boys, and this task was already more difficult. Even Liam Stone was a little confused. He had never seen such huge monsters in his life, but he quickly got his bearings and destroyed the beast. A few minutes later, he also put the head of the ugly bat into his duffel bag. To be honest, Zeke was on his subordinate's side, as he thought he might not be able to handle the tasks. But Stone turned out to be a fast and experienced warrior. The guy looked at the tablet again. There were 50 hours left, and he still needed to find and kill 9 types of monsters. With such success, they would most likely fail the missions, since there was nothing else to search in this area. But then the most interesting thing began. The guys again heard strange, terrifying sounds and quickly prepared for battle. In the next few seconds, small fiery stones rained down on Zeke, which were very difficult to dodge, and the sword was of little help here. The guy shouted at Liam Stone to immediately drop his duffel bag and try to dodge the rocks, as it was extremely difficult to do this with a bag. Liam Stone tried to untie the bag from himself, but, as luck would have it, he got tangled in the fastening. So Zeke cut all the straps with one swing of his sword. They had to decide very quickly what to do next. Every second of delay could cost them both. Liam Stone, looking at his partner's bloody hand, was simply horrified because it was completely covered in blood. Liam Stone, looking at his partner's bloody hand, was simply horrified because it was completely covered in blood. Draker warned Liam to be extremely careful, as it would be extremely difficult for him to keep an eye on his partner in this fight. At that moment, they were attacked by dungeon worms, the most dangerous monster, for which required a dozen purple knights to defeat. The servants of Simmons the Ram did their best and sent the most vile monsters to the boys, but don't let them rejoice too soon. Zeke Draker didn't come back here from his past life to be defeated by some worm. He attacked the wrong guy. So the guy gathered all his strength into a fist and desperately rushed into battle with the monster. He also counted on Liam's support. Even the Blue Knights tried to avoid meeting the dungeon worm in such a place, because this monster was able to burrow underground and move there. If the fight were to drag on, the two of them would not have enough time to escape the cave in time. Draker understood this perfectly well, so he decided to act according to the situation. He needed to protect himself and Liam Stone. The monster also turned out to be talking. It croaked that these two were buried alive in this dungeon. But such words did not frighten the young knight at all. In his young life, he had already heard many similar threats, but so far he remained alive. He simply turned off all his thoughts and concentrated exclusively on the process of the fight. This is exactly what real professionals do. The monster also had no intention of retreating. The dungeon worm was a terribly strong monster, but Zeke did not let down his guard for a second. The guy fought as if it was his last fight, gritting his teeth as he moved forward and continued to hack at the tentacles of the dungeon worm. Zeke realized that if he struck the monster more than once, it would cause a lot of damage, and the boy began to act. He plunged his sword into the monster's body up to the hilt, thus making deep wounds and causing the monster terrible pain. The worm simply wriggled, throwing its tentacles in different directions, but it could do nothing. It was exhausted by pain. Zeke glanced towards Liam Stone. The guy was also fighting desperately and very bravely, trying with all his might to subdue the worm. At some point, Draker climbed onto the monster's back and began to strike even harder, realizing that the worm's pressure was weakening. Somewhere nearby, he heard the voice of Liam Stone, who was worried about his master and was trying his best to help him, showing his devotion. It turned out that Liam had coated his sword with anesthetics, and its main ingredient was belladonna, which has the ability to dull the senses. As it turns out, this magic ingredient is a deadly poison for worms, and today this monster has had enough of it. In a critical situation, remembering that belladonna concentrate is poisonous to the worm and improvising using an anesthetic was Liam's brilliant invention. Such prudence and ability to adapt to a critical situation fully justified Liam Stone's reputation. Zeke shouted that the moment he gave the signal, Liam would have to hit the worm again with all his strength. Taking this guy with him as a partner was the only and right decision for Zeke Draker. He was not mistaken. The guy rushed closer to the head of this monster, inflicting more and more blows on the monster along the way. This performance had to be ended. A second later, the guy activated the soul and body technique and gave a sign to Liam, who struck the worm with all his fury, and that was the end of the monster's existence. The cadets who had already managed to escape from the dungeon were gathering near the walls of the ruined castle, but there weren't that many of them. The manager announced that everyone could be free only after the points of each team were counted, so they would begin now. Each of the participants recalled what they had experienced over the past few days and what kind of monsters they had not seen. Completing a dungeon awarded 30 points, then goblins and hobgoblins were counted, followed by orcs. Reyna Tarun's team had a total of 180 points. They almost reached the record score of 200 points, although it was clear that thoroughbreds always had high scores. The teacher called Reyna Tarun to him and praised her. The girl's performance was always surprising. She tried her best. When Reyna Tarun and her partner were sent home, the manager called the next team, as everyone was standing and impatiently waiting for their turn. The next two cadets scored 120 points, but this was also a high score, exceeding the norm by a full 70 points. The guys envied Reyna, because for now she was in the lead, and no one had yet managed to surpass her, but someday someone would definitely knock her pride down a notch. And this hero will of course be Aries Simmons. He must be the first and prove to everyone that they were wrong to mock him just 6 months ago. He will be able to get rid of Reyna Tarun, just like he did with Zeke Draker, by setting traps for him throughout the dungeon. But Owen Simmons forgot that he was not dealing with a simple cadet. Zeke Draker had no intention of giving up and was still preparing many more surprises. The next minute, Aries heard a familiar voice which irritated him more and more. Turning around, the guy saw his enemy, Draker, who had emerged from the cave. But how is this even possible? Wasn't the orc they sent a monster with the highest rank? How did these two even manage to defeat the dungeon worm? Zeke grinned and looked Simmons straight in the eyes, then asked why he was so surprised. He probably didn't expect to meet him again. Then he came close to Aries and said that he was very glad to see him. They would compete again and see who would come to victory first. He showed with his whole appearance that he had guessed about Owen Simmons's meanness, and therefore hinted that he would still have a chance to take revenge on this scoundrel. Out of anger and disappointment, Aries didn't even know what to answer to this arrogant cadet. He was simply bursting with indignation. He would have to come up with a new plan again. These pompous purebreds have been a pain in the neck for Owen Simmons for a long time, and he won't stop until he leaves Zeke Draker behind. But Draker only smiled. He didn't doubt his strength for a moment, and he won't doubt it any longer, from his path. The Master of Ceremonies praised the team of Draker and Stone for their resilience and courage, as they have led the competition so far. Teacher Andre decided not to drag it out and count the points that these cadets earned in the competition. Although they lost all the heads of the goblins and monsters along the way, they dragged the enormous head of a dungeon worm into the castle courtyard. Everyone started whispering and pointing fingers at the guys, because they were the only ones who had lost the duffel bag for collecting goblin heads. Liam Stone began to explain that the dungeon worms had attacked them completely unexpectedly, which was why they had lost all the other heads during the fight. He explained to the teacher that they couldn't afford to fail the exam, so they ultimately decided to get the worm's head. Andre began to carefully study the samples of the monster's teeth. They are goblins, gremlins, hellhounds, orcs, and finally trolls. Everyone was very surprised because none of the guys even imagined that there were also trolls in the cave, and these creatures are quite dangerous. Andre explained that, judging by the amount of blood, there were several dozen of them, but it would be unfair to count them all. Therefore, only one monster of each type will be taken into account. Trolls and worms in dungeons are not included in the evaluation criteria, but the result still comes out to 368 points. Hearing this, Owen Simmons became furious. He was indignant that the count was unfair, because these two had only brought out the worm's head from the cave. But the guy was quickly reminded that the head of this very worm itself is worth 180 points, and this is quite enough for an undisputed victory. If Zeman had encountered an underground worm or a troll, would he have been able to survive it all? But these two did. Zeke Draker and his partner just stood there smiling, laughing at how stupid Owen Simmons looked. Zeke once again put that stupid and arrogant oven ads in his place. Well, that wasn't the end. They'll still fight. Ares and his accomplices remained in complete confusion for some time. After all, they had failed to defeat Draker today. Zeke will not allow anyone to dare to mock him anymore, let everyone know who they are dealing with, and prepare for a serious fight. He managed to do something extraordinary again because the Zimmonses, in their impunity, went too far and manipulated the dungeon simply to get rid of Zeke. And the guy understood perfectly well that Owen Simmons could not have organized all of this on his own. Otherwise, the plan would definitely not have worked. Ares is not that stupid, and he is also a bit of a coward, so he definitely had to look for students, perhaps even his own father. It turned out that Draker was being watched more closely than he expected, and if he hid his power for too long, it could play a cruel joke on the guy. Therefore, Zeke decided to tone down his ardor a little and just observe the situation. He needed to take a few days off. He was about to leave the yard, but he heard someone calling him. The guy turned and saw that Reyna Tarun herself was heading towards him. As it turned out, the girl was also worried about Zeke's victory, because she was hoping that this time she would be called the winner. The guy understood that with each new day he had more and more enemies. He didn't expect this, but now he would have to live with it. The next day, the guy went to the ring to spend some time alone with his thoughts, and also to train to his heart's content. It turned out that he had acquired another devourer skill, which allowed him to digest a large volume of food, and it cost only 50 points. But when the guy started reading the current line, who realized that the skill description had completely changed, and this needed to be sorted out immediately. He can now absorb monsters' abilities, but it would have been good if he had acquired this skill before the trial in the caves began. Zeke immediately activated the Devourer skill, thinking that he would definitely need it in the future. But then the guy saw some strange shadow above him. This shadow simply enveloped him and tried to carry him away somewhere. He had to hold on with all his might and not make any sudden movements. The absorption of energy compensated for its loss. The headache began to hurt much less. Perhaps it was just ordinary fatigue. The guy felt like he was simply born again. Mental exhaustion passed just as physically, and he felt a complete renewal of his body. The feeling was very light and pleasant. It was clear that Zeke's entire body had successfully recovered from his past adventures. Well, the Devourer skill was definitely worth the price. With it, Zeke could easily eliminate the negative effects of other skills. Now he can train 24 hours a day without feeling any physical fatigue or hunger, and he doesn't need any rest to recover. And the guy decided not to delay. Otherwise, he would start training right now. He headed to the Academy's training hall, where Decker had been waiting for him for a long time. Zeke Draker didn't want to see absolutely anyone, but his assistant said he had a very important message. The fact is that Master Graham sent him a finished sword. The master was so captivated by his work that it took him only a few weeks to produce the copper of his dreams for Draker. In the boy's past life, the sword he wielded, which he received from the galleon, was forged from mithril and steel. It was clear to everyone that the legendary sword was an unusual weapon, given that this time Zeke used dragon fangs as the material. The guy thought that this weapon would be very similar to the one he owned in his past life, but it turned out to be much better. The guy took the sword out of the package and took it in his hand. It seemed like a very bulky and dull item. He turned to Master Graham and asked why his sword was not sharpened yet, but he replied that the weapon was exactly as it should be. I wonder why Graham thought that this particular sword would suit Zeke. The guy was still slightly confused. The sword may only look strange and crude, but perhaps it's worth testing it in action to see how good it is. Master Graham reminded that this sword does not yet have a name, and it would be worth thinking about what to call this product. Graham also thought for a long time about the name, but nothing good came to mind. His tongue remembered that in a past life, this weapon was called a shining sword. The guy imagined the weapon completely differently because it was made from a magical dragon fang, and accordingly, it should have a menacing appearance. The next moment, the guy took a dagger in his hand and made a cut on the skin of his hand, and blood immediately began to flow from the wound. Master Graham was terribly scared. He didn't understand what this young cadet was doing. He needed to stop the bleeding immediately. Even if the healing factor that the guy possesses is constantly activated, it is still his skill and it must be controlled. So the tongue opened the status bar and temporarily disabled the healing factor class skill. And much to his surprise, it worked. Now it was time to name the sword. And to do this, Zeke raised his hand, from which blood was dripping, over the weapon so that a few drops of it fell directly onto the blade. Master Graham stood with his eyes wide open. He did not understand what the guy was doing, but he thought that this was a new ritual of naming the ball. It was a traditional ceremony in the northern region of the continent, where knights named their weapons by pouring mana blood or aura onto the sword. When the blood touched the ball, a magical ritual would cause the weapon's owner to fall into unconsciousness until he found a suitable name for the weapon. And now Zeke was plunged into a strange state for himself. It felt like he was deep underwater. Strange stars were flying around him, on which various names were written. He needed to find the one with which the knight would go on through life. This had to be a new name for a whole new path, and Zeke Draker knew it, so he was in no hurry to catch the first star that came his way. Suddenly, he was indeed engulfed in some kind of whirlpool. One large drop fell into it, and real magic began. Everything was plunged into pitch darkness. Bagamut glowed brightly. He understood perfectly well that all this was happening now for a reason, and the universe was giving him a hint regarding the name of his sword. Of all the names, he got the name of the Golden Dragon, which means that everything is in perfect order with his subconscious, and he is doing everything correctly. Master Graham was absolutely delighted, because very few knights know about this magical ritual, but Zeke read about it when he studied Dwarven history. The man asked Draker's tongue to stay for a few more minutes. He said that he wanted to tell the guy something else. Draker decided to take a little break and gather all his thoughts together. He turned off the healing factor skill again, because he needed to learn to manage passive skills. This way, it would be possible to prevent the revelation of abilities, as happened with the Duke. There was no need to reveal the cards ahead of time, so he bandaged the wound on his hand. Moreover, first everything had to be thoroughly checked, and the black sword, which the master believed to be indestructible, had to be tested in action. Further on in the status bar, the guy read that the sword would also be endowed with additional abilities as it developed. The guy had never heard of such a thing. He already thought that no one and nothing could destroy this weapon because it was created from a unique material, the Fang of the Golden Dragon. For completing the tasks, the boy received a strange chest as a reward. He hesitated for a long time before opening it, trying to guess what might be inside. Opening the box, he noticed that it was almost empty inside. At first, Zeke even thought that it was some kind of joke. But, looking deeper inside, at the bottom of the chest, the guy saw a strange, small paper package. It turned out to be a map. The system informed the boy that he was now holding in his hands the travel map of Grandmaster Kaiser, who was a hero and knight of the Clock Tower. This is a character popular on the continent of books, who, along with his knights during their journey, were able to destroy the kingdom of Kronos, one of the greatest civilizations of the past. However, there is no evidence of the authenticity of this story, and many consider it a simple fiction. But it turns out that King Kaiser really did exist. Zeke launched the map analysis function, and after a while, the desired point was already marked on the minimap. It turned out that the location was located at the farthest point of a giant mountain range, and it was located in the territory of the barbarians. Everything may be much simpler than Zeke thought. Judging by the user's level, the training was completed. The item related to the quest was discovered. Zeke decided to unlock the quest and was surprised to realize that these were only the first steps, and the real game was only beginning now. Even the rewards at this level were much more valuable, so the guy decided not to bother himself with choosing and spent all the points he could accumulate. Luckily, the guy had earned enough points in previous missions to acquire several new useful skills. One of the most valuable skills was the Dragon Claws, so the guy did not spare a huge number of points in order to obtain this important ability. If he learned to manage this skill correctly, then even going alone to the land of barbarians would not be scary for him. To begin with, he decided to test this powerful ability right in the training hall and was extremely surprised by the result. The acquired skill was the Dragon Scale, and the guy also decided to immediately activate it in order to know how to control it further. Zeke trained for about an hour, trying to tune his body so that it would accommodate absolutely all the abilities he had managed to acquire recently. He didn't even use aura, But despite this, even strong blows didn't cause him much harm, simply reflecting off the scales. It was as if the guy had put on a full set of armor, and now no weapon could harm him. Meanwhile, a crowd of people had gathered in the training hall of the Draker Academy. The cadets were embroidering in even lines. Before the cadets were to be tested on their ability to control their aura, the administrator decided to remind the young people of the rules. Behind the cadets stood training dummies, specially made so that a normal sword strike would not leave even a scratch on them. Andre then said that if the attack is carried out using an aura, the dummies will fly apart. If you fail to destroy your own dummies, the test is considered a failure. This time, if a cadet fails, he will have to start from the very bottom and can simply forget about promotion in the academy. Aries Simmons smiled slyly. This training method was no different from the aura training that was used in his family, especially since the aura training course itself was developed by the Simmons family. No matter how talented the purebloods and awakened ones are, no one can match the Aries in their ability to control their own aura. Aries was the next one to be called. Andre warned that when the guy was completely ready, he could begin immediately. The guy immediately went to his dummy and decided to test your abilities. Everyone present was deeply struck by the resonance of his sword. He is only 13 years old, but the boy already knows how to use the resonance of the ball, and this brought everyone into real delight. Owen Simmons walked slowly between the dummies. He was confident in his abilities, so he expected only triumph from today's task. Everyone froze in anticipation and didn't even breathe as they watched him smash several mannequins. Andre was satisfied with the young cadet's work, so he said that Aries had done an amazing job and could rest. So he could even surpass Lord Abel himself, but this would not lead to anything good, which is why everyone watched with interest. At one point, the guy grabbed a dagger and rushed into attack. No one expected this from Aries because he had already completed his task. The other cadets watched the situation with bewilderment and couldn't figure out what was wrong with this guy and who he even thought he was. After Oven, several young knights performed poorly on the task. It seemed that Simmons had demoralized them somewhat with his behavior. But on the other hand, not a single cadet has ever completely failed. Everyone managed to inflict at least a small cut on the dummy, so no one had any problems with the aura. But even in the academy that housed the most elite cadets, there was one who stood out among them all, and that was Reina Tarun. She walked to the center of the training room and stood between the dummies, then approached the instructor with a proposal. Reina Tarun would like the teacher to evaluate her dragon hunter technique. It is very important to her. But Andre stopped her. She must understand that these criteria were created for older students, and she had not yet reached that level. Channeling your aura into a sword and being able to use dragon hunting techniques are two completely different things. Aries Simmons smiled wickedly. He was sure that Reina would swing her sword a couple of times and immediately lose control of her aura. It seemed like the girl was digging a hole for herself, so Andre asked again if Reina was sure of her desire, and she nodded. Thanking Andre for this opportunity, the girl immediately took out her sword and raised it high above her head. Everyone froze in anticipation. Now Reina Tarun looked like an ancient brave knight who never stops under any circumstances and always goes to the end. A few minutes later, several mannequins had already been blown to smithereens. The girl had really gone wild to prove to everyone what she was capable of. A loud whisper went through the hall. Everyone. They thought that Aries controls the aura best of all, but it turned out that it cannot be compared with the Reina Tarun. Owen Simmons could not understand what was happening now, and how this girl was able to handle the sword so deftly. He failed again. Everyone simply froze in surprise. It seemed that for this fragile girl in this world, nothing was impossible. She was capable of anything. Zeke Draker was also watching all of this, and the guy understood that now he needed to make absolutely every effort to defeat Reina Tarun. He recalled all his skills, and also remembered that he himself did not yet fully know how to use his aura. From the very beginning, he was not the target of this demonstration. Reina simply wanted to prove that even purebloods and awakened ones are not always winners. Zeke Draker was the next to come out to the mannequins. He had never come to such a class before, so everyone looked at the guy with genuine interest. Teacher Andre said that this was the result of a bet that he won, and now he and Reina will compete for first place. Zeke Draker was a unique golden pureblood awakened, a rookie who managed to break Lord Abel's dungeon clearing record. Now he will fight for the championship and the opportunity to be called the best cadet of the Draker Academy. The boy activated all his abilities, because today was the day to decide how the cadets and teachers would treat him at the academy. Some will laugh, but he will still make most of his enemies respect him. The guy had never been a weakling. He was confident in himself, but he didn't think that today's task would be so difficult for him. Well, no matter how you look at it, The guy hoped until the very end that everything would be okay. It was not for nothing that he returned back to the past. Zeke concentrated entirely on his sword and the dummies, then used the Dragon Hunter technique and delivered the first strike. Reina Turin watched the guy carefully. She realized that this guy was perfect, even in comparison with instructor Andre. Zeke Draker had been training the Dragon Hunter technique for 2 years before his regression, so he could accurately calculate the correct direction of the strike. He knew what position to choose for his working leg. He was even able to control the flow of his aura. His body moved on its own, without the control of its owner. He spent a lot of time practicing all these techniques, but it was all worth it. After a few minutes, all the dummies were destroyed. Going over the basics he had learned one more time was never a bad idea, and it was enough to get him through the difficult task. This will also be enough to motivate Reina Turin, because this girl still needs to study a little. Zeke Draker looked back and looked at the work he had done. It turned out that his aura flow was too powerful. It destroyed almost everything. By performing this task, the boy tried to show off Reina-level strength, but it seems he once again attracted the undue attention of the other cadets. Aries Zimmons couldn't believe his own eyes, how this impudent fellow was doing this and why he was getting on his nerves so much lately. All the other cadets were also surprised to the depths of their souls because this cadet was only studying for his first year, but had already reached the level of a purple knight, and Howard Draker was also surprised. The man even invited the young knight to his office for a serious conversation about how the boy managed to reach such a level at 13 years old. He simply replied that there was nothing unusual here, he was studying, just like the other cadets. It was just luck and nothing more. But the guy was given a strange but very tempting offer. Howard offered him the chance to graduate from Draker Academy early. The management took the bait much faster than the guy thought. He stood out too much, and it was inevitable, so Zeke agreed. The chief remained in his chair for a long time after the young cadet left his office. Too many memories flooding back. The next morning, 2 people who wanted to graduate early from Draker Academy, Zeke and Reina, gathered in the Aura training room. Reina Turin tried to show her superiority with all her appearance, but she did it extremely poorly. Secretly, she simply admired Zeke. They didn't have to wait long. Confident footsteps were heard, and a man entered the training room. It was the senior knight of the main family, All Draker, and it was he who would be examining the 2 cadets today. Zeke's eyes widened, because he knew this man from his past life. This was the Silent Sword itself. That's what this knight was called. Zeke remembered some fragments from his past life, but they were too fragmentary to form a complete picture. The memories were from the time when Draker was still a mercenary in the squad, and considered everyone from the Draker family to be corrupt liars. A scene came to mind where a silent sword sat over the body of a dead man, and it seemed as if the man was saddened by the loss of his loved one. Coming closer, Zeke saw that a grave had already been prepared nearby, and the man was about to bury the body, but for some reason he was too slow. The guy didn't know who the deceased was, but he understood that the Silent Sword didn't want to say goodbye to this man at all. Zeke quietly approached the knight, who looked back in bewilderment, and the guy asked if he needed help. He said that even if the Silent Sword refused, he would still not leave and would help bury the body and fill the grave. Then Zeke decided to introduce himself, calling himself Zeke Maridoi from the United Northern Forces. The stranger said he was Draker, but then he added that he had recently abandoned this name, and in this they were completely similar. Both had a strange fate. It was then that the stranger said that he had chosen a different name for himself, and recently he has been called the Silent Sword. It was this man who now stood before Zeke and Reina, reminding the cadets of the rules they had known since childhood. Reina knew she would fight until she passed out, or was killed by Zeke Draker's sword. But then the knight announced that they would not fight against each other, but together against him, that would be fair.